All right, so I'm calling the CCSU board meeting to order at 6:30, September 29th at the Essex High School library. So, first item is any visitors or staff to be heard? Crickets are chirping. Okay, we will move on to the admin inform.
So,
Yes, sir.
point of order, friendly agenda amendment for item number 11.
Okay, you want to put that on now? I mean, just in terms of taking that off?
Executive session, superintendent evaluation. We will not be needing to do that tonight.
Okay.
So be removed. And we can still have discussion around it, but not the executive session portion.
Okay. So noted. Okay. Now we'll move into the admin inform.
So I have in the house Amy Cole, who's Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, and Kim Gower, who's the Education Assessment Manager, here to provide an update of where we find ourselves since we've purchased Admin Inform. They'll update you on where we're at with year 2 of implementation and give you some idea of where we find ourselves contractually for the coming years. So I'll turn it over to you, Amy.
So I'll point you to a handout that you received. If you don't have one, let us know. We have extras, I think. A few of them sitting right there.
Yes.
I know that we only have 15 minutes, so what we're going to do is just walk you through where we are in terms of this project and then stop and let you have an opportunity to ask questions. And we could certainly get caught in the weeds in this one, so we ask you to keep us out of the weeds a little bit. We've been deep into this project since it started. For those of you who know, or I guess don't know, we committed to purchase this system and contract with this vendor beginning March 2014. We speak in terms of a 3-year implementation plan, but really that year 1 was March until the end of June. So that's our sort of abbreviated kindergarten version of year 1. So we're currently in year 2. We have a full 3-year implementation plan. We didn't bring a copy of the entire plan, but I believe you received it in your org notes and I can get it out to you. I think back in March or April we got it to you. But what you have here is a little bit of background in terms of how we arrived at this decision, how we're sort of managing this project, and where we find ourselves in terms of year 1, year 2, and year 3. Just a little bit of background. The system itself, Admin Inform, has 3 components to it, and we purchased those 3 things separately, and that's important to remember as we talk to you about moving forward with this. The meat of the program is called Admin Inform, and it has a report center, so that's where our current student data sits. And Kim Fiske-Ward joined us last September when we contracted with the company in March, began diligently loading that data, and she'll talk with you a little bit about what that data is that's currently in there and where we're going with that. That report center allows us to have data visualizations. That's primarily where we're going to be interacting with our teachers and our administrators in year 1. We chose to purchase in this contract 2 additional modules, and we're giving ourselves until the end of this contract to determine whether or not we want to continue with those 2 modules. IDMS is an assessment builder. It allows our teachers to build an assessment, whether it's an individual classroom assessment or a common assessment, deliver that by printing it out or via email to our students. If it were delivered via email or electronically, the students would take it, it would score it automatically, and that data would move into our report center. That's a system that we're just beginning to tap its resources and getting to know. We have a few teachers who've stepped up and are willing to play with that a little bit without the data being connected to our report center. And then what we did is we also chose to purchase a large item bank, a set of tasks through which the teachers can shop through standards, find items on a test, and build a test in that way. In other words, if I would like to assess my students in a specific literacy common core standard, to be able to identify it, identify whether or not I wanted to see some multiple choice or constructed response, how many hard, how many easy, how many mediums, whether I wanted recall or understanding, and a series of tasks will show up, and I can shop for those tasks and build a test. Again, we chose to contract with these three for 2.4 years. I'm going to have Kim Fisk-Gaywar now go through what has occurred in year one, which again was that abbreviated year, where we find ourselves in year two, and where we're going in year three. And then we have a series of screenshots so that you could get a sense of the kinds of reports that we're building and that our teachers are beginning to interact with. And stop us at any time if you have any questions.
Okay, so you see on page 1 and then also on page 2 these tables. We tried to show you the overall components to the project: infrastructure and assessment and data, trainings and leadership. To try to summarize this, because I really want to talk about page 3 and on, infrastructure is about setting the system up with teacher, class, student data. Assessment and data is about attaching kids' data, like local reading data, kneecap data, attendance data, incident data, to the children's records, which enables us to make the kinds of charts that are shown on page 3. The trainings that are referenced in this table reference the fact that we've done an ELT Summer Institute on August 12th, and now Amy and I are in the process of offering what we call admin overviews to any building that wants us to come out. So principals can then decide how soon do they want to roll out, for instance, Inform, the report center, to their staff, so they can experience the tool's data visualization capabilities. In terms of its capabilities, this is actually the most exciting part of the tool. Once you load teachers, classes, and students, and you attach assessment data to them via a unique code, you have the ability to make beautiful graphs. For instance, here at the high school, last year, they assessed that 9th grade class in something called STAR Reading, fall, winter, spring, and then the now current 10th graders just got assessed this fall. I was able to make a report showing teachers a child's growth or lack of as a result of those 4 assessments. We haven't been able to do that, so that's pretty exciting. Its most standard common way of displaying data is this first graph that's red, blue, green. This isn't one of our reports, but it's very similar. We were trying to protect student confidentiality, so we wanted to use this anonymous report. This is a columnar report. If this columnar report has what's called a performance range attached to it, maybe for kneecap, if you have an achievement level of a 3, we'll give it a blue. If you give it a performance range, it can then make this graph report, the stacked bar charts. This one really excites us. We've been playing with it with kneecap data, but more commonly our grade data, for instance, K through 5 with the Common Core, because we hope that it will help us begin to see perhaps trends in different Common Core strands. This one down here is another example of one that we did with Essex High School grade data, final grade data for the end of last year, also showing us possibly trends or lack of in different English classes, which is what's, if you look at it closely, which are the words down here. It literally shows you the different classes the kids took and how many of them in the pie chart, how many of them got an A, B, C, D, or F. Another nifty feature is you can click on a wedge in this pie chart. If you flip to page 4, this picture right here, you can click on a wedge in the pie chart, and as a teacher, see the kids, which is that little picture there, anonymous names again, whom perhaps got an F or a D, and begin to think about, should I make a group about them? And begin following them over time to see if there's a greater issue with them by running additional reports about them, like how are they doing in their math class if they also failed their English class. This little bugger here, the line chart, is called a comparative chart. We haven't been using this one yet, but we're hoping we can use this one to show teachers how their kids compare, for instance, to kids across a grade level, because teachers are currently only allowed to see the children who have the scheduled class the teacher teaches. And then this final one is that very first one I referenced already, the columnar report, and it has this very nifty feature. Well, there's many nifty features. This is our actual data We put a box over it so you couldn't see the kids' names. And what we tried to show you were a couple of things. This is a toggle detailed feature that down here, see these sort of this rainbow effect at the very bottom? What it does is it lets you see things like the number of kids who were at proficient, below proficient, etc., the percentage of them, the highs and the lows as in the student average within each criterion. And in this case, what Amy did, just because we were sitting there playing, is she wanted to show you what I described we're able to do now. Right here, the green bars, that's 4 assessment windows worth of data for that child, which, as I said, is very exciting to be able to see. And that represents a report that I, as a system administrator, can make for a teacher or a principal if they ask for it. Right now, we're in the process of trying to give people a sense of this is what the data is that's in here and what you can do with it as a user and how you could perhaps ask someone like me or Amy to make you special reports from it.
Can you, before you go into this page,
Yes.
can you just summarize for folks, by and large, the kinds of data we've been able to
Yep.
put in
Yep.
since March?
Once we signed the contract in March, we went into data dump mode. Load, 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 because we wanted to show ELT at the Summer Institute the possibilities. At this point, we have EHS and CTE grade data, again from last school year. We have trimester 1, 2, and 3 Common Core math and literacy data, K through 5. We have power standards, social studies and science, for instance, K through 5. A count of incidents, literally the number of discipline incidents a child has. A look at a child's attendance record, broken out by subcategories such as excused absences versus unexcused. We also, are you folks familiar with Access for ELL, English language learners? We have 3 years of that data loaded. One thing that's nifty about data like that is it comes to us in an electronic format, so it's really easy to format it and load it. As I said, we have Star Reader from EHS, Star Reader and Star Math from CTE. Of course, I'm going to blank now that I'm on this roll.
I'm so impressed you're doing this without notes.
We have bits of local assessment data from last year because we wanted to show folks, now that we're entering into our assessment window for the fall here, what the data could look like graphically in these reports once we load it from this window. And I don't think I've covered it all, but that's a big chunk of it.
The reason, as well as student demographic information. So
Yes.
the reason I asked Kim to just relay that is because that's data we had. It was sitting in different spots in different systems. We currently use a health program called SNAP. That's where we store our health data. We have PowerSchool, which is our student information management system. Star Reader has its own sort of piece of software, but we've never been able to pull it together in some way that we can cross-query data, and that's what we're particularly excited about.
Then, Amy gave you a brief overview of the fact that in this contract, this 2.4-year contract, we bought additional modules. We thought we would show you examples of what those other aspects of the tool do. The one that's at the top of page 5 is a screenshot of something they call the Launchpad, which is another way to enter into Admin Inform. We hope to build more here from the perspective of, remember those kids I mentioned that maybe got a D or an F in English? We hope to teach users how to use the Launchpad to take a group of kids underperforming, assign specific tests to them, and as I said, track them over time for growth or lack of. We also hope to copy something that a wonderful client, Edmund Klein in Wyoming, is doing. This graphic, sorry, they're hard to read. The one underneath the Launchpad, this one right here, is an example of Sheridan County School District in Wyoming's individual learning plan for students. Again, a kid underperforming has a plan to help follow him or her using district, maybe building, and perhaps even assessments assigned by the teacher, again to look for growth or lack of. And you can share these plans with, for instance, the child's parent, speak to them about the issues going on with the kid, et cetera, et cetera. Another area under the hood is the key performance indicator dashboard, more stacked bar charts. We haven't done anything with this yet. It has the ability, if we make decisions at the district and or school level, to enable us to tell a graphical big picture story. perhaps we would decide we'd use kneecap reading to have a district story about how kids in grade 3 are doing. That's the purpose of this key performance indicator dashboard. Again, haven't gone here yet because right now our focus is here's the report center, here's all the data in it. Let's talk about what you can start doing with said data. The final piece that Amy mentioned is IDMS, or the assessment builder. It gives you the ability to build assessments. We have a lot of work to do to learn more about how to use it, number one, but most importantly, how to build good quality assessments using, for instance, this item bank to begin to determine more about our kids' aptitude, say, around the standards. And this little tiny picture is an example of what an assessment could look like if we choose to go this route with the assessment builder.
So just take a minute and look at the costs, and then we'll let you answer the questions. As we said, there's a series of modules. So Report Center is the one we began with, because in that .4 year, we just needed to get under the hood. We didn't need to look at the assessment builder, and that's essentially what we paid for in that .4. We do pay for a service bank, which buys us technical support from this company. We anticipate that that number over time will decrease because we'll be less and less dependent on them providing that technical support. And then we have hosting and encryption security fees. So if you look at year one, we invested $10,000 in that startup year, which was a sort of flurry of activity. We have a very big year that we're in right now, which is $31,000. If you were to look at, and let me also say that this is, there, you can see the cost per student. Our number is based on 2,800.
2780.
2780. So if you think about Report Center being the heart of this, we're paying essentially $275 per child to access the Report Center. However, we also pay for service bank and hosting fees. IDMS and Item Bank are roughly $450 together. What we need to do in this next year and a half is determine whether or not we're going to be committing to staying with the assessment builder and the tasks, because again, that's $450, probably $5, I would imagine, by the time that we go to renew this, or whether or not we'll just continue to use the Report Center, which is why we're tapping into teachers right now to have them really kick the tires on that system to see if that's something we want to continue with. It is not an inexpensive system. It's quite a large system for our district. It's one that the teachers have been particularly excited about, the teacher leaders. We've targeted teacher leaders. So all administrators have user accounts right now. We're working with teacher leaders. We're presenting to all of the we're training all of the middle school teachers in November. They, as a group, are particularly excited about the assessment builder because we've really struggled with finding adequate screeners, particularly for reading and math at the middle level. And they're hoping that they can shift some of the funds we use locally for that towards this system, if we find that it works well. The principals are particularly excited about the reports they've been able to access, and we've had a number of them already calling over and seeing what kind of additional reports we can build for them. And we just presented to 25 teacher leaders last week who eagerly asked for user accounts as soon as we finished here up at the high school. We have a pilot group over at CTE, the Intro to Tech teachers, who will be beginning their process and using it after the new year. So that's where we find ourselves at this point in the game. Our goal would be for all teachers to have user accounts and trained by fall 2015, so that in that year 3, all teachers will have access, and again, we'll really be able to judge this as a system. And that's where we find ourselves. My one regret is that we didn't put these on PowerPoint. We couldn't open the system up in front of you for security reasons, and there's no way to turn on a graph without seeing student names, so we struggled with how to present this to you. But I do wish that we had put it on PowerPoint. But I was sensitive to the fact that you had 15 minutes, and I wanted to make sure I gave you an opportunity to talk.
Amy,
Yes.
can you provide some reflection on how we paid for this as
Sure.
well, so that people know where you're at budgetarily?
Sure. So local funds were not used to pay for this. I'm not sure if you remember, as a board, we were in a position where we had some TAP reserve funds from our teacher apprenticeship program that left us and went over to Champlain College. And if I remember correctly, there was a split between those funds to food service as well as this program. It went to two different places.
Three different places. Fund balance for the SU, a little bit of money for child nutrition surplus or deficit, and then TAP, and then the data system. And then you also, I think 50,000 went to the data system, and then we also used some money from the tech partnering, the money that Vince had garnered through the relationship with Franklin Central and Franklin West.
Mhm.
So this is paid for through,
FY16.
right,
Through 16.
so you don't have to include anything in your budget for this coming year is the point I wanted to make.
But this is cheap.
You mean the
This
year?
is not expensive, right? I mean, because this is
Wasn't
full
what I was
SU.
expecting to hear.
This is
I
full
love
S-
hearing
this is
that.
complete SU, so you could add every budget, CTE, U46, Westford, and EJ, add them all together. What do I get? 70 million? No, 50? 55.
Probably a little
55.
more than that.
So 55, 30,000 a year, right? 0.1, less than 0.1%. This is our business. Like that is everything you said, plus all the other stuff that we can keep adding, right? That is our business right there. That is what we do here. Like this is all the information about what we do. Like, yeah, we have to spend 0.1% of our total budgets to, keep this. And yeah, I mean, if they haven't been able to do it in 3, okay, we have to keep doing it long enough to really see what can they build with that assessment tool or whatever. It's worth even spending a few more years to, really make sure we had time to, see
Evaluate.
what could be done with it.
Al?
Yeah, just two items. The first item is, it looks, it's a summary, high-level summary kinds of reports. But the emphasis on the high school is differentiated instruction, tracking at the individual student level, assisting that student more on a time, very critical time basis, responding to their needs more quickly. How does that system meet that need at the teacher-student level on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I'll give you a tangible example. Last year, we've been using an assessment called Star Reader in ninth grade for many years.
Understand.
We changed it to Star Enterprise last year. With the support of having a literacy coach at the high school, it's changed that work immediately because we now have someone who is administering the assessment in a standardized manner, chasing down kids when they're not in that day,
Right.
and producing the reports. The reports that she produced, in order to lead conversations with teachers, took us several weeks last spring. Erica and I went in and led data protocol conversations with all ninth grade teachers where we looked at their students' ninth grade Star Reader data up against their eighth grade kneecap data, and then had the teachers reflect on what was their classroom performance. Erica was able to do this overnight with Kim's help. So having the ability, not only the person assigned to work the data, the person assigned who understands the data, which is Erica in this case, and a system that can pull it together quite quickly. Now, the teachers this year, all teachers do not have a login. By next fall, they'll log in and they'll be able to see it immediately.
Oh, okay.
Right now, because they don't have access, because we haven't trained them in it, Erica's producing those reports with Kim's help and then handing them out. But the turnaround was very quick.
In the areas that I've worked in, the reports are automatically generated. It becomes a data-driven organization without manual intervention, without tons of manual reports, without manual setting up the system. But it's more of a data-driven, this is where you need to place your effort, and it's a report auto comes out to those individuals automatically. I want to make sure the system can fulfill that need. And the last thing I had is, when is the plan that this board will get? When will that plan be in writing? I know people don't like paper, but when can we see a real plan rolled out to the district?
When you say
A
plan, what do you
target
mean?
date,
Are you talking about the implementation plan?
implementation plan.
That was provided last March.
To the CCSU board, I apologize, I didn't bring it with me. It's quite
Yeah.
a lengthy 3-year implementation
Yeah,
plan.
I'm looking for a one-page, maybe one-paragraph sentence as to when the rollout will occur.
This is depicting it to an extent. These tables here do depict it to an extent. It is as close as we could get to one page,
Okay.
showing you the 3-year plan.
Okay,
When you say rollout, do you mean to full faculty?
yes, to teachers.
It
So
says train all
The
teachers.
plan right now is,
Right.
we set the date as a group of administrators with a few things in mind. One, we were less familiar with it, so we weren't quite sure what the trainings would look and feel like. We really have learned quite a bit in the last 2 months. The other is that we were sensitive to the fact that while the high school field tested SBAC this past year. Our K through 8s will be doing the real SBAC this spring. So we asked principals to commit to, by no later than fall 2015, all teachers have access to it, which would give us that full 2015-16. There are schools that are moving faster towards that, but we felt like that was a reasonable request to say by fall 2015, all teachers will have access to it. It will be, we have something called Power School, and the teachers experience it as Power Teacher. They'll be able to access it directly into that SIS system. They can use it as, or they can go on the web and see it, or we can put a desktop piece. So they will have access to it by fall 2015. The middle school teachers will have access by the end of November of this year.
Okay, I'll defer. Yeah.
You answered my first, I have two questions. You answered my first question. That one-stop shopping for teachers, I think, is really important. That when they're entering grades on Power, grades, or they are entering attendance on Power Teacher, there's an icon they can click and go right there. The paper that's right in front of you is a lot easier to access than the paper that's over there on your desk. So the students that are coming in from sending schools, so from the islands and things like that, how is that data, gonna mesh with everything else? Because we have students in our system that were getting K through 12, but then the kids that are coming in, from other areas.
The answer is it depends on the data. We have a state data system called Education Data
Right,
Warehouse, and
right.
we have a way to enter that. So we can currently, in fact, Kim worked with our programmers, Mike Myers and Helen Kordakova, to be able to extract any data that sits on that database for any of our children. So in other words, if they were in Williston or Grand Isle, we can get their third grade NECAP scores because it sits on a state database. Can we get their third grade local Fontes and Pinnell scores that's sitting
Right.
on the teachers? Probably not. When their files come up, they vary quite a bit in terms of what's included. There's a feeder school situation coming into Essex High School, probably the not more critical, but a similar one is that CTE right now receives students from 9 feeder schools.
Right.
And so trying to get that data, anything we can get electronically, we can pour in.
Right.
Anything that's handed to us in paper, we have to figure out exactly how was it collected, and
I did-
so definitely our data within our SU is better because we
Yeah,
we have that longevity.
I-
And we have a great relationship with Essex Town. They've been historically partnering with us in terms of moving data over here.
I just think for those districts that are sending us students
I understand.
along with money attached,
The challenge
it's
is we don't
awful
own them
nice
until they're
to
here.
look at
Right.
those students and say, where are they doing well, where are they struggling? And then we can kind of use that data to better support their transitions here.
I
so-
agree, and some states have gone to statewide data systems that allow that movement.
Yeah.
Vermont just hasn't. So as clean as the data is that they can give to us,
Yeah.
we can
Right.
get it in, but we can't always guarantee that's the case.
And you can see it's like self-fulfilling. So now that we can make groups, we can do the group with our data, that the group can be all the island kids. Then we see something, hey, all the island kids are different from, something is different about whatever it is. We found something that's different with this group. Then you can feed that, then that can feed back to the sending school district to, okay, we'd like to know more about this. What could you give us to help us go and understand better what's happening here?
And typically, we've had that relationship, certainly with Westford, obviously, and
Yeah.
Essex Town, and some of the smaller schools. What we do, our math teachers will go out and meet with them once a year just to talk
Okay,
with them
right,
about that
right.
anecdotal piece.
Yeah.
But the data sharing is difficult with our current governance structure.
Mark?
Just a question on Service Bank, is that use it or lose it?
No, it
Or does
rolls
it-
over.
okay.
It rolls over from year to year.
So our ability to predict it is not super critical if we can continue
Correct.
to use it. All
We
right,
will
thank
not
you.
lose it.
Jack?
Are there any issues that year one was a truncated year? It started in March and went through June. It wasn't a full year long.
We made the decision in January to move forward,
Right.
and we decided that March was the time. I think it took us a
Right.
little while as a
No.
board. We're just following a fiscal year, so we called year one March to June, just so that we could speak in terms of fiscal or school years. Did that answer your question?
Are you
Yes, so,
cons-
no, it's not 3 years long, it's really
It's 2.4,
2.4
exactly.
years long. Okay,
Right.
that's all I was
Exactly,
asking, and year
yeah.
one is the
It's a
0.4 year.
2.4 year
okay.
Correct.
That's-
implementation plan.
No, and you answered my other questions about students coming in from other districts, and the data loading, it sounds as if it's much preferable to be electronic loading. We're not fat fingering in a bunch of numbers and data from all kinds of sources that's ripe for wrong input,
No, fat
you know?
fingers. If it's electronic, yes. We have worked with our programmers to develop some electronic forms that our teachers are using to enter the data for the
Right.
assessments that are, if you can imagine a kindergarten screening, or some of our math assessments are
Right.
moving manipulations and they make marks, or our F&P is reading with them and determining their text level, then the teachers do need to enter that into something electronic that then comes over to us. And that would likely not change. We do have the capability within this system for teachers to enter it directly into the system.
Okay.
But some of those assessments will always need to be hand entered.
Okay.
Any other? Oh, Marla?
I got a question on page 6, the very top, under costs. I thought I heard that these costs are coming out of CCSU budget.
The entire cost here was funded under the TAP Reserve
Right.
Fund. When we move into our discussions about planning for FY17, we're gonna need to come back to you with a proposal to say how much of this, how many modules are we proposing that we purchase? And then I assume it would be through the CCSU budget and assessed back.
And it'll be shared, across the
Signed them all.
districts, just like your shared services model.
Because my question is, the year 1, year 3 costs are shown below in the fall of 2015. Budget work will need to be done to incorporate the costs into the budgets for the 2015/2016 school year. So where else am I gonna find?
That's an error.
costs? That's an error?
That's an error.
I
It should have said
apologize.
2016,
It should say
17.
16, 17. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay.
FY17.
And the other question, refresh my memory, Kim was brought on board to work this program, and did we have her, finances taken care of through CCSU, or is it
She
done
is an
through?
SU employee, yes.
Okay, and
we
so
did budget
now
for
we're
that
planning
position.
on having her every year in the CCSU.
Yeah, that
It's
position is
required.
budgeted.
And it's a required position in, education quality standards.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that all of a sudden we don't get out there and we're minus Kim or someone like Kim.
None of us
Sure
want that
that
to
too.
happen.
I don't want that to happen.
So,
Kim?
Yep, yeah, so a few quick ones. So on page 2, year 2, it says update, it says July to September. So like the check marks, is that, so that's done?
Yes.
That basically,
well,
everything in
it's-
there is like done, or sometimes it doesn't?
In the update column, yes.
It's like, really,
Those
that's
check-
like the current.
Yes.
And then next steps is, okay, the rest of this year,
Yes.
what's still to be done?
Yes, it
Okay,
was
good.
our
I'll go
attempt
through
to
the-
try to tell you the plan for the remainder of this year.
Right,
I was overzealous with my check marks.
right, yeah, I was like, okay, wait, it's not the check marks, so just go in the
That's a check
columns
box.
and, yep.
But this was designed to show you quite a bit has been accomplished, I think, within this single year, being able to, and we sat in this very room and train administrators and teacher leaders on a system and be able to open it up and have them see all the data that's been poured in was tremendous.
Year 1 was very aggressive. That I feel really good about how we used those 4 months. What we accomplished in that time from a data load perspective. I'm still amazed that what I put on paper came true. And then to be able to follow it with being able to show ELT on August 12th, look, that was great.
Right. So then, the other two that I wrote down, on the student learning plans, so that, is that, I mean, this might be yes to everything I say, but is that like IEPs are gonna like go in there?
We currently
And-
have a system, this again is, the way that I guess I explained it to the teacher leaders the other day. There are systems that are designed around singular tasks and they do them really well. We have a piece of software called GoalView and it does
For
that
IEPs.
task really well.
Okay.
What we've done is we've connected it to this. So should we decide to use learning plans, key information would be
It could
moved in there.
feed back and forth or whatever. Yeah. Okay,
So when
great.
we assess for intervention, we'll be able to say, this is what we did over this period of time. We'll do some progress monitoring. We can see which interventions are effective, what to continue to do for certain children, and what not to
Okay.
do if it's not working. It's
Right.
not doing it.
Right, and then kind of related was like the whole transition to individual learning
Learning plans.
plans. Then also would then be just connected, probably not, it wouldn't be residing in here.
We looked
Well,
at
that's
it.
still a decision. You know,
Right.
this,
Okay,
this
okay.
has some capabilities.
Yep.
We also have a piece of software called Naviance that also has that capability.
Okay.
In addition,
To be decided,
Naviance
Yeah.
has career
Naviance
search
is
and
that.
college search. So again, that's
Okay.
what I mean by every
Got it.
system.
Yep.
Right.
And
So,
we have
so
does
to
what
be
it does
determined,
well.
you know, where that would
I
kind
think
of
it's
go.
important too to note that Rob Reardon reported out that at the county-wide meeting of high school principals, they've decided to use Naviance. It's a program that we've had in place for personal learning plans. So part of this is also staying coordinated with what else is happening because, as you mentioned earlier, as kids are coming in from various sending schools, we want to make sure we're aligned with personal learning plans most definitely.
Yep.
So that's still, we're still in the learning phase of that, but I think Naviance will be the high school choice.
Okay.
And we're exploring how to connect Naviance with this. You have two incredibly capable programmers here who have been able to connect all of these
Amazing.
pieces
Right,
of
right.
software
Yes.
together.
That's great. So then I could give you my first pass at board, like what from a board perspective would be really interesting is something we've been talking about is this whole transition from NECAP to SBAC, and a question I kind of frequently ask anyway is even if you just look at the NECAP or now we're going to look at the SBAC is okay, so did it get the right answer? So often a comment that comes along with it is, well, it's a standardized test. Not all kids do well on standardized tests, but the question is, okay, that might be true, but does it get the right answer? If it says 75% of the kids are proficient, is it right? Meaning, what report could be generated with the other data about reading or whatever that says, oh yeah, it's within 5 points. Like it's about the right answer. You know, some way to connect, you know, NECAP, SBAC, and then to bridge between NECAP and SBAC when we don't have the continuous data. Well, what does our other data telling us about those years? Right.
We're
So
looking
that'd
forward
be-
to that.
Yeah.
So just to build off that, I know our board had just an open question of what data would we like to see if it could be made available to
Right.
us. And that was more just trying to envision the types of measurements, milestones that we might look at as a quick overview, a snapshot on the general health of our assessment system or, you know, our student achievement or outcomes.
Yep.
And feed that back through the administration to see how it could fit into what they're capable of doing. So maybe that is something
Well,
your
we should
board
just
would
stay
be
connected
interested in
between
as
all
well.
the boards on, and that might end up being through administration on, well, you know, the other board did ask us for this report, so we thought that was, so here. we
Once
did it for you
it's
too.
once it's built once, it can be
Right,
easily
right.
repeated. So I would assume that's the case.
Just my last question. I think this is going to be a huge paradigm shift. Because if you're a teacher, traditionally, you know, you provide information to students, and now all of a sudden you're getting some feedback
Right.
to shape your instruction. So now all of a sudden the teacher becomes a data interpreter. And so when you said they're going to get access whenever that date was, what's the PD going to look like? Because if I'm a teacher and I've got all these papers with numbers and stuff on it, if I don't understand how to use that information, it's like hubcaps on a tractor to me. You know, so what's the PD going to be like that around that?
Well, first, we're hoping it won't be paper that they get.
Well, yeah.
We had a data search team. That data team disbanded. We then created a data system implementation team, and that team has been the same folks, but now it's become expanded, and we've added some features to that list. That group is currently doing some work this month at our next meeting. One, looking into confidentiality and helping us define or set a definition to define FERPA's legitimate educational use, which we've learned that we really need to decide here and put in writing. The second is to look at the kinds of, not just how to use the system, but the data training materials that we want to provide. We're looking through a series of materials, including there's a set that I just received this week from Harvard called DataWise, to be able to look at that so that teachers and administrators can use that to do exactly what you described. It's not just about the graph. What are the questions that you ask?
Right.
I explained earlier, Eric and I have been running data protocols with teachers. It will take some time for us to get comfortable with that.
It's just, it's such a different way
It is.
of providing learning experiences for children. I just hope we can commit to it and stay on this path, because it's where it's going. But to support teachers
Yeah.
in making that shift is such a critical piece, I believe.
What's interesting too, and it's sort of the horse and the cart, what I had hoped happened, I'm beginning to see already, which is, it's a leverage point to make folks hungry for that.
Yeah. Oh,
So we were
gosh.
able to produce a graph that showed all K-5 standardized report cards responses. So a teacher, 5th grade, wrote down how their students were doing on their standards. Never do the 5th grade teachers have an opportunity to see district-wide how are our students doing on standards. We were able to produce the same thing for all grades at the high school. So when we opened it up in front of the math teachers to say, here are your math courses and here are how are your students doing, they never have a chance to see how that works across classrooms. Opens up transparency.
Our teacher has that ability. If you go to student stats, and they can see how children are doing. But yeah, I think that's just, to get that global perspective is just going to be so
yourself and your students
empowering.
within it.
Yeah. Thank you.
A word about confidentiality. There are user account levels, so our teachers only have access to the teachers that they're responsible for, and that's our current definition of legitimate educational use. Our teachers, or our principals, will be able to see everything in their building, and we have some district-wide user accounts. Where we're struggling a little bit with is the number of small buildings with quick transitions, and whether or not it makes sense for a principal to be able to see beyond, sort of outside their building. And we're working with our vendor to try to figure out ways to make that happen, so that we can make better use of it, but still feel like we can fit within, I think, our moral and legal obligations towards confidentiality.
Great, well, thank you guys.
Thank
Coming in.
you.
I think we're all really excited
We'll
to
do a
see where this
PowerPoint
is
next
going.
time if you give us 30 minutes.
Okay.
How about that?
And, if anybody, I guess if you guys come up with any questions between now and the next time you see these guys, go ahead and ask and share the responses with us, so. There you go.
So the way to ask would be probably to send to Amy directly any data
Yeah.
questions you would have, no matter what board you're on, and she would just collect those, and then we could, kind of do a running question and answer column, so that
Yeah,
if the
right.
question's repeated, you
Right.
could, see across district and across SU.
It would be helpful to me, though, whether or not, if a request is coming, is that a request for a report to an individual or to a board? I need a
No,
little
it's
bit of
just
guidance.
a question. Just questions.
These are the kinds of things we
no-
think
no
about,
requests.
not go produce a
Yes.
report
Right.
for you.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
and I would say, like, just kind of collect them, and then as it works to
Right.
a next report, you kind of are answering them,
Right.
and then they all go in kind of the bucket of,
Right.
at some point in a little
Yeah,
while,
thanks for
whenever that
clarifying
is.
that.
Okay.
No
we-
requests.
Because we might not have thought of the question, but we're interested in the answer to
Right.
what the other guy thought of,
Right.
you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
Good evening.
All right, so, in your org notes, you've got, the year 14, financial report. And you can see that there was a surplus, but mostly due to, not having the associate superintendent position.
Yeah, just, you always get the quarterly reports, that we decided it was prudent to actually show it on your agenda so people knew that you saw them on a quarterly basis. The one caveat I would say is that this is still an unaudited year-end report because we haven't gone through the independent audit yet. So this is kind of our best guess at the snapshot right now, and I would hope there wouldn't be many changes. As Michael mentioned, the kind of the overview, you have kind of the detailed report, and then there's narrative to go along with it. The overview is that we did have a surplus because of the associate superintendent salary and benefit savings, which was budgeted but a vacant position. We did use some of those funds for the superintendent search, so we did use some of those funds, but we did end up with a fairly healthy fund balance. we didn't use any of the fund balance that we had rolled forward of 57, and we still had 24 left. So that basically means we've got about $81,000 as a fund balance that we can roll forward as a revenue in FY16. Since FY15, this year's fund balance is only $16,000. There's a pretty, that's a pretty big gap that we could fill. I would want to try to find one-time expenses, or you don't want to have big swings in your fund balance revenue, because that's like having big swings in your expenses. So if we have a big increase in fund balance, this would be a good time for us to look at, what is that final child nutrition deficit right now. Maybe we could put an influx of money toward that to try to get us out of the hole. If not that, then something else, like I mentioned, sped buses. We have 3 special ed buses that are going to need replaced. But those are things that we're going to keep in our mind about uses of that money. Other than that, you have the report. If there's a specific question, I would probably need to go back and do some research, because even though this looks like a pretty detailed report, there are literally hundreds of lines that feed into this. So if you do have a specific question, let me know. But if you are pretty comfortable with the report that you see and the summary of that report, then we can move on.
Mark?
Just a quick question on, I guess, the transition from this year to next. On purchase property services, 51 Park Street, is that going to have to look different or be categorized differently as its usage is changing?
I'm sorry, which one?
So purchase property services, how the main portion of it is for 51 Park Street?
That 51 Park Street is central office.
Oh, sorry,
Not
sorry.
21
Not
is
21.
Park Street
Yeah.
School.
Okay,
So
got me.
Yeah.
the one good news about next year is, that's always the rent plus the renovation, repaying the renovation loan to U46. That renovation loan is paid off this year. So in FY16, that's $12,500 reduced expenses because we will have paid it off. So that's good news. But yeah, the 21 Park Street, meaning Park Street School, is an agreement between Essex Junction and the high school for the upstairs, and Essex Junction and CCSU just for the first floor. And that is something that is an agreement, but not necessarily a budgetary item.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments on the report, financial report?
Just one.
Al?
On the food deficit, we've talked about this at different times, when it was 50, 100,000. Now it's over 200,000. Given the state initiative on hunger and providing additional assistance for meals, what is your expectation about this deficit? And are we going to get any data that shows what is driving the deficit across the various components of the schools, various schools? Because it seems like it's still going up at a very high rate.
Yeah, it's not necessarily going up. If you pull out your old budget from last year and look at the deficit there, it's pretty much similar to what it has been. As a matter of fact, I think we projected it might have been a bigger deficit. Deficit is kind of a misnomer. Deficit is really each year. What I'm really talking about is the debt from many
Right.
years of deficits.
Right.
We thought that we were going to end up, I think, like $130,000 deficit this past year, and I think it was like 100,000. But then we also had prior year deficits that we were mounting up. So we will show you during the SU budget. I always show you the history, the financial history of revenues, expenses, the amount we lost, the factoring in of the subsidy. And you're right, we had started with like a subsidy of 50, then we went up to 100. We were hoping we would see deficits of about 100,000 every year, and that a subsidy of 100 would be enough. But yeah, all the initiatives that you hear about are great for kids, great nutrition things, but not really great financially. The only thing that we're getting extra money for is from last year to the next year is free reimbursement for the reduced portion of lunch, so 40 cents. For kids that are on reduced lunch, the state will pay us the 40 cents instead of us paying it ourselves. So that will help some, but it's not. It's a drop in the bucket.
Okay, I'm just trying
It's
to.
really the USDA nutrition guidelines that are causing a lot of costs. I mean, it's the right thing to do, just like many things in our world. It's the right thing to do, but it comes at a price.
Just trying to understand this cost, and, because it's gone up so much, and my expectation is it'll probably be 300 or 400,000 a year after.
Only if we don't try to take care of the deficits that have built up. The annual deficit, I still think, is probably going to be in the between 100 and 150,000 range. It's just that if you don't cover it to that extent in prior years, the lump total now is over 200,000. So I will show you the charts during your budget development. Next month, you'll see where we stood each year, and it'll also show at the bottom kind of what the new reality was in each year. The one thing that we're excited about for this year is that we've opened it up a lot more for catering, so that we are going to try really hard, so that if there's curriculum meetings, for example, we're going to try to use Child Nutrition as the vendor for providing the food. And we've done that in a few cases already this year, and it's so far it's been received pretty well. So I'm hoping that that'll actually, I mean, we're not looking to make big money on that, but it would be nice if we made some more money on that. But yeah, next month you'll see a chart that'll be just specifically on child nutrition.
Okay, thank you.
Jack,
And just
Jack had a comment.
okay.
Grant, as the fund balance went up for CCSU, how does that compare for the individual districts? I mean, I hate to think that some districts' fund balance is going down and the CCSU fund balance is going up, and there's some kind of inequity maybe going on there. Just wondered if you can comment on that at the district level.
Yeah, pretty much everybody's fund balance should be going down, and the SU fund balance was going down too.
Right.
And it went down to $16,000 and would have gone down again probably this year. But because we had the associate superintendent position that was budgeted and it went vacant, that's the only reason why the SU fund balance went up. The districts are still gonna go down. EJ is gonna go down because budgets are tighter. And in the SU, you have one position that goes vacant, it drives the fund balance,
Right.
change. In the district, you might have a position that goes vacant, but another one that you end up having to
Right.
get another para in. So there's a lot more moving parts, but we have been budgeting tighter in the districts. And so preliminary look is that the U46 is gonna go down further, EJ is gonna go down further. Westford's not gonna go down any further because they have zero. So yes, those things are happening. I would say the generic rule of thumb is that fund balances are gonna go lower every year because we build tighter and tighter budgets. It's
Right.
an anomaly in the SU just because one of the few positions was budgeted and remained vacant.
Okay. Tim?
It was just on the food.
Sorry.
Just a clarification, just remind me, because I forgot. We only call it a deficit because we decided before that we tried to make our food service like pay for itself, or whatever you call it.
It's an
Right?
enterprise.
It's
yeah.
an enterprise. So we tried to make it so that way it takes care of itself. This thing that's like a deficit is just the piece that it can't take care of.
Right, and it's
like,
much
in a way
larger
of-
than it ever was.
And it keeps getting larger and larger because there's more and more to be taken care of now. So that might mean that ultimately we're thinking of a way of changing it. We can't keep calling it a total standalone enterprise. It needs to be fed.
Right. And in
No pun intended.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And in talking to my counterparts, other business managers, we're not alone. This
Okay,
is
this has
very
gotta be,
typical.
okay.
Yeah.
So it's
Very
like the same
typical for
story.
people who run their child nutrition. So hopefully it doesn't. I should knock on wood. I can't imagine it's going to get much more challenging because the USDA guidelines, we've pretty much
Doesn't matter.
bit that off. I
Yeah.
mean, so, and our director does try every year to make efficiencies, looks at staffing levels every year to see if there's things we can do, shaving back on time, and his work with the Food Service Directors Association with rebidding. So he's not just sitting back,
Right.
but it's harder. You can't find the savings that are commensurate with the cost.
Yeah.
There,
Okay.
on that point though, some districts, not in Vermont that I've heard of, but nationwide, have rejected the,
Guidelines.
pardon me?
The guidelines.
The guideline, have rejected the guidelines because they are too costly for districts to afford. Would we ever anticipate we might be in that position where, I mean, I understand, you know, it's not an enterprise and we have to continue to feed the beast, so to speak, but if these guidelines are driving that increasing deficit, does there come a point where we would have to consider what those guidelines are and do something about either amending them or rejecting them because they're too costly?
Yeah, very good question. I don't know how to respond to it.
Yeah,
just off the top of my head.
and maybe I'm just planting a seed, so to speak. I don't know what the deficit threshold pain level would be. You know, this district absolutely is committed to good nutrition for our students. Don't get me wrong about that. But I also know that good nutrition comes at a cost, and yes, it's not quite an enterprise. You know, it's not self-funding, and that I think we want to make these investments, but in good nutrition for our students. But at some point, we need to analyze what is that investment. And I know you do good work, Grant, in keeping us informed of what those investments are. But I think this is more a comment to the board than it is to the administration. Is that do we continue to, as Grant said, this is an ever-increasing deficit. You know, which means more and more investment from our districts to make this happen. You know, and is this something that we continually want to do?
Marla?
But
Yeah.
if we decide not to follow the guidelines, is there federal funding that's attached to whether you follow the guidelines? So we wouldn't receive that funding, and would we be in worse shape?
Right.
Yeah.
Those are all good questions.
I would have to look at it, but that's
Yeah.
exactly what I would be looking at.
Yeah.
I would assume that all the
Weighing it
federal
out.
reimbursements that we get per meal, all of that would be cut off. And yeah, I think the problem is if you did take that route, you would not only drop below the guidelines, but you would drop really bad as far as nutrition is concerned. But yes, it is a food for thought, so to speak.
Right.
But yeah, and the amount isn't necessarily getting dramatically worse. The problem is, as it got a little bit worse, we were dealing with a subsidy that was set from the prior year. So we had a $70,000 deficit, and we had $50,000 surplus that we had budgeted for that. So it got $25,000 worse. And we bump it up to 75, and it was 100. So I'm thinking that we're settling in, and I've said it for a few years around 100. I think it's going to be a little bit worse than that, but not dramatically worse than that.
Okay.
I have another question, but it probably relates to the FY16 budget discussion. But it's kind of cyclical because as we're talking about, we eliminated the assistant superintendent position and we've used funds from that. So my concern is, as we go into FY16, to make sure that we still have an item or a budget item that shows that amount of money somehow, because if we find that that isn't working and we need to add the position, I hate to see us in a financial situation. So I wasn't sure from reading.
It's actually one of the things that I think I'm going to talk about in
the
the
discussion.
FY16 budget
FY16,
discussion. Yeah.
okay.
All right, why don't we just go ahead and just
Move into that?
Move on.
roll right into the
All right.
FY16
So
budget.
there is a 4-page document that's titled FY16 Budget Discussion SU. Every district will get their own budget discussion document, although a lot of it will be similar language. For the SU, it starts with cross-cutting and legislative issues, cross-cutting such as negotiations. You all know that we have teacher contracts through 16 and support staff through 17, so we don't have to make assumptions like we sometimes have to make. Some of the legislative issues, universal pre-K, that's going to be a huge issue for some districts. It's going to be somewhat of an issue for EJ and Westford, but we were already headed in that direction, so it's not going to be as bad for us as it might be for others. Especially in EJ, we've made a lot of investment in private pre-K slots. The biggest kind of impact to us is that they set a statewide rate, which is $3,000. and we had been around the $2,600 range. So that statewide rate, increasing that rate is challenging the number of slots that we can come up with. So we'll be looking in EJ and Westford at the number of slots we think we need, maybe not to satisfy complete universal pre-K, but to at least satisfy the demand related to universal access. Personalized learning plans for all 7th and 9th graders this year. That's going to be a cost. I'm not sure how much. I'm not sure what the cost drivers are there. I do mention that for 11th and 12th graders, if they're in dual enrollment, you have to have a PLP for them as well. Dual enrollment for 11th and 12th graders, they're eligible for 2 publicly funded dual enrollment courses if it's in their PLP. That cost has always been covered as far as if a student goes to a college, that's been a state bill. This year in FY16, I should say, in FY16, we are liable for that expense. It's 50% of the instructor if the instructor is paid by the college, or 100% if it's paid by the high school. I would assume that when we're talking about 100%, we're talking about like one of our
Like Stacy Anthony.
statistics,
Yes.
AP statistics. That's a dual enrollment
class.
course. We've already paid for that, though. I mean, we always pay for that. So the 50%, if it's outside, is what would be a new cost. And I'm meeting with guidance tomorrow at the high school to try to determine how we're going to estimate that cost.
Is there any element there, I mean, the cost of a tuition credit at the state college, Johnson, say, compared to the cost of a tuition credit at Middlebury College?
I'm sure it's going to.
Is there
It's going to be, I'm sure, a flat amount.
flat
based
fee
on-
based, most likely probably the state college system?
I would assume so. Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of unknowns, which it's driving me crazy because we're in the fall and I got a budget for this and I don't know, what that bill is going to be. We got to see how our data is capturing how many kids are in it now and project how many we think we'll do it next year.
And that's gonna be based on what's in the PLPs? And when will you get that information in the PLPs in terms of budgeting in the future?
The fall of 2015.
In the fall, so I won't. Probably won't have it in
Sign up for dual
time.
enrollment. It's not in there yet.
So what I
So
think what
it's
we're
not
gonna
like
have
the
to do.
PLPs have to be the year ahead with the dual enrollment request there, and then you've got. it's-
They're entitled. It's a free lunch.
Pieces of legislation.
I'm aware of it, I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah,
Free
so,
lunch.
so my goal is to try to find out, so how many kids do we have this year that are in it, and then use that to kind of project what might be
popular.
the interest next year. And it's gonna be a few years of data before we get probably get all the kinks worked out. We'll see. The other thing is that I don't know if I'm gonna be paying that 50%, or whether it's gonna be a check that's cut by the AOE to the college. And it's not that I have been sitting around waiting, to see if somebody's going to tell me. I've been asking the question, but no answer yet.
And we pay.
We'll see.
Of course, they're gonna say the district has to pay.
Right, right.
Well, we're going to end up having to budget for it and cover it with taxpayer, with tax rates and all that. But it might be taken off the top by AOE, and they may pay all the colleges at the state level. Even though we'll see the expense, we won't have to be the ones to actually write the check. It'll be kind of an on behalf type of thing, I'm guessing, yeah.
So I think it's really important to just note that this is one of many things that we're seeing as board members that are state mandates. These are legislative mandates that are coming into effect, and the budgets precede them by a full year. So our ability to predict how much something's going to cost, where the nuts and bolts of that system that aren't even in place, is frustrating and can lead us very quickly to either be overly conservative or not, and either be in trouble or not at a time where budgets are tight. So that's a message that needs to be loud and clear when we're talking about this all in the fall.
So just to warp back to the big picture, and it ties right into the lunch and nutrition discussion, and I'm thinking of all the Vollmer's list of the ever-increasing burden on America's public schools, and the list starting back in 1910, physical education, and just all of the things that schools have taken on, dual enrollment, will now show up in 2014 as it's how many pounds in a 5-pound bag?
Yeah, and I don't have on here early college, but that's another one. I don't have it on here because it's not really a cost, but it is in a way, because if someone goes early college, you lose that ADM. You don't pay for it, but you lose the ADM, which hurts tax rates. Excess,
Great.
Yep.
Brian's got a question.
Grant, I had heard there was some discussion about doing a multi-year average for the dual enrollments, kind of working on a pool like the tech center, so there was predictability.
Rolling average.
Yeah, and they have data now because they've been paying for the dual enrollment opportunity came in to affect. I think this will be this is the third year that it goes to 50% share, and then in 2016 it's 100%. So there's some data in the system as far as what high schools are doing as far as dual enrollment.
yeah, and that would be a good argument for the state to be the one to pay, to continue to write those checks and pay it, because they have that data. I don't know yet. It could be that I may be told what I need to budget for that,
Yeah.
which would be great. And it would be probably based on a rolling average, like a 6-semester average type of thing, only it would be less time than that. So it may end up being something similar to the Visters on behalf, where
Yeah.
it's they send me a piece of paper and say, enter this as an expense and this as a revenue. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll see. And if that's the case, then it might just be another strain on the base tax rates instead of, an expense change.
Yeah, that's like worse.
Yeah.
And that has to be our feedback to Linda. I mean, Linda came to our meeting and said, oh yeah, tell me what all the unfunded mandates are. Okay, yeah, this is worse than an unfunded mandate. Make us put it in our budget so the budget goes up, but then you pay it? Like, what?
You heard
What-
me mention that when
What do you?
she
Yeah.
came.
What do you want? What do you want me to do? Like, I mean, that's almost like being worse, right? I mean, okay, yeah, they're still going to pay it, but well, then why don't keep it like it is now? Just keep paying, and it's not in my budget.
Well, if they
Right?
they could do something where they show it as, they give us the revenue and the expense, so it really is no impact to us locally. But this is still a cost to the system, to the ed fund.
No, right. Right. It's still on to the ed fund, right? I get that, right?
The other one was that I asked Linda, there's an assumption and then there's wording. The assumption always been sort of a per credit basis, looking at the state. That's been sort of a common assumption of how the districts would pay this, some kind of negotiated per credit cost.
Yeah.
But throughout it, and I see that you use it, it's really specific on the cost of the instructor, which would make a lot of sense because in a dual enrollment basis, there's a lot of costs that are built into a credit that a high school student isn't necessarily utilizing.
Right.
So it's really interesting to watch this over the next, our budget process, January, and see where the legislators go in seeing if that is an intention or sort of an oversight in that they're kind of trying to key it down on instructor cost, because it means that it would be an unpublished cost at the university or college state level, because there is no instructor cost published. And then how do you divide that and so forth? So it's a really interesting element, especially considering the state potentially could get out of the negotiating of costs starting in 2016, because they no longer will be paying for any of it. If they get out of the negotiating of that cost, it could be a real burden. If you have to negotiate a cost and Chittenden East has to negotiate a cost and Chittenden South, that could be, sort of put your hat on, as Roger Derby used to say, because then it could be completely different for everybody, every buyer.
Well, and the good news is this is high school, and we've got a little bit of time because I have to do the SU budget, then Westford, and there will be other people that'll be chomping at the bit because they'll be working on their high school budgets before we do. So I'm hoping we'll get some answers. Excess spending threshold. It's very hard to explain, but I'm going to try to do my best. Excess spending threshold, if you exceed that spending threshold, basically your tax rate is impacted $2 for every $1 you're over that threshold. it is very painful if you exceed that threshold. That threshold has been 125% of the prior year statewide average. It is now down to 123%, and instead of the prior year, it is the FY14 statewide average, and it's anchored at 14. This is really a challenge for us, because what that means then is the FY14 statewide average is only going to be inflated by CPI, which is like 2.5% or something. Whereas the statewide average education spending per pupil goes up typically, maybe 4%. So we're not going to be measured against that just the most recent year's statewide average. It's going to be FY14, and it's going to stay there. That to me means that there are going to be a lot of districts, maybe every one. I guess it can't be every one, but there's going to be a lot of districts that are going to exceed the excess spending threshold that never did before. I don't think it's going to hit any of us for the next year, but I do think that it will hit us eventually unless the law gets changed. In addition to that, that percentage drops to 121% in FY17. So I don't think it'll be an impact to us in 16, hopefully not 17, but in 18, maybe 19, I'm thinking we're going to be really close. So just something to keep your eyes on, and hopefully there's some relief, and the legislature can back off of this at some point. But it is the legislature's, it seems to be the legislature's feeling that this is the one place that they can really force controls on budgets by making tax rates really go up. It is what it is. Moving on, I'm not going to talk much about centralized special ed services. You know that we moved most of everything into the SU already, with the exception of personnel. We can't realign personnel until we negotiate it, and our collective bargaining agreement is through next year, so the earliest we could be talking about moving people would be FY17, so nothing we have to worry about right now. Healthcare reform, there's so many unknowns, it would be probably a waste of time to talk about it right now, because I wouldn't shed any new light. The good news is that we are postured to be able to make sure that we don't have incur any kind of penalties. We're still grandparented with our programs and so I don't think we have an issue with healthcare reform. Tax factors, the economic landscape, I kind of summarized it by saying that most professionals are predicting continued slow growth. But they aren't saying that the grand list is going to improve significantly, and so if the grand list isn't going up, tax rates aren't going to be going down. It does look like it'll be probably potentially several years before the general fund and the education fund start rebounding. So are we going to have another difficult year, challenging year? Probably, and probably for a few more years. Base tax rates, the homestead tax rate went up 4 cents from 14 to 15. The tax commissioner will make a recommendation in December, but what I've heard is that it could go up by as much as 5 cents for FY16. The base education amount, which is the factor that we compare our spending per pupil to get our district spending adjustment.
Florida's looking better.
That should increase enough to allow for 1 year's worth of inflation every year, but it doesn't always. And if it doesn't again, then you could look at education spending per pupil increasing by like 3 or 4% and a base education increase of only 1 or 2%. If that happens, then that 5 cent base rate increase could turn into an 8 cent increase. So you want to look at base education or tax rates, but you also want to look at the base education amount and make sure that that's increasing enough to accommodate inflation. Equalized pupil counts, in a nutshell, I'd say U46 is probably going to be around the 2% decrease in equalized pupils. Westford is going to be at 3.5% for sure, because they're held to that hold harmless amount. And Essex Junction should remain fairly stable, similar to the past few years. Ken Jones of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development has agreed to take on the work that Bill Smith has provided in the past to give us enrollment projections. So we'll see how that works out. We are not having to pay for it in year 1, which is good news, and we'll see what happens after that. Common level of appraisal is based on 3 years of real estate data, so I think that that should be fairly consistent. Might drop a little bit, but shouldn't be much. And then we get into just factors and assumptions relating to specific budget areas. We already touched on the fund balance revenue. We're going to be going from 16 to 80, so I would like to take this opportunity to try to chip away at some of that extra that's needed for the child nutrition deficit. Staffing, and this is what you were talking about, Marla, we are talking about eliminating the associate superintendent position for FY16. But we do want to apply some of that savings and put it against professional services so that if something comes up that, oh, we didn't anticipate that this was going to be as challenging without that position, so we need to contract some professional services to help us out. Another benefit of having maybe 50 or 60,000 of that set aside as professional services is that if we end up having to go back and say, we really do need that position, in FY17, instead of going from 0 to a fully funded associate superintendent position, we'd be going from like maybe 60,000 to a fully funded position. I don't think we can afford to be conservative to the point where we just keep budgeting for that vacancy, but I do think we should at least be prudent and maybe, set aside maybe half of that salary for professional services in case we need it and in case we end up having to bump back up. But it will be a significant decrease because of that. Salaries are going to be impacted by the admin comp model because we have negotiated agreements. So, if you need a refresher on how the admin comp model works, we can probably have Deb come in and show you that, but there's no assumptions there. Substitute and overtime salaries, I just show you where we're going to budget for the SU. Minor increase in substitute, level for overtime. Health insurance, we're talking about trying to keep budgets at like a 2 or 3% increase because of CPI. So it seems ridiculous to celebrate this, but I'm celebrating the fact that it sounds like health insurance rates are going to be at about the same rate as this year, which was 4.5%. So I think we're going to start with assuming a 5% increase, and we'll see what happens when we get the actual not to exceed. 5% is, it's horrible as far as if you had a 5% increase in your budget, your tax rates would be through the roof. But considering what it could be, 5% sounds pretty good. We are going to have a higher employee contribution. Teachers are going to go from 15 to 16% employee contribution. Support staff will increase to 8%. And for all new support staff employees hired after July 1st of 2015, the share is going to be 10%. For cash in lieu, we're going to assume a third of a two-person rate. The reason why we don't just assume $1,000 is because if somebody leaves and somebody new comes in, that person could be on a family plan, and then let's say gotcha, instead of $1,000, it could be $16,000. So we try to kind of be in the middle, and what we do is for all the people that are cash in lieu, we budget a third of a two-person rate so that it's somewhere in the middle, so that if turnover happens, it won't get us too bad. For retirement contributions, we calculate that at the employee level. In the SU, there will be an increase because we have some people that have been hired long enough now that they're newly eligible for retirement matches. Workers' comp and property and liability insurance, this is going to be the same for all districts. We switched over to VisBit in, I think, 2011, and in 2012, we decreased the budgets for workers' comp and property and liability. We've either decreased or maintained that level of funding every year. But I think it's now time, we're getting close enough that that just inflationary bump has got us to the point where we're going to have to increase those budgets a little bit. So for workers' comp, probably for all entities, I'll do a 3% bump in workers' comp. I'll probably only increase property and liability by 1%. This still, if you're keeping track, gets us basically to where we were in FY12 for the amount we're paying. So it was a good thing switching to VisBit, and we benefited for a long time. We're still benefiting, but we're not at a point where we can cut those budgets anymore. Unemployment, We're gonna apply the FY15 rates to the FY14 actuals. If we get FY16 rates in time, then we'll apply those. I think that we're probably gonna see a little bit of an increase in Westford, a decrease in EJ. Others should be pretty stable, but you never know. I don't think that we've done anything as far as staffing decisions in recent years that would drive big unemployment claims.
I was gonna ask that. Yeah.
No, I think we should be okay. Tuition reimbursement, we're gonna do the same thing we always do. We'll take the prior 2 years of actuals that we see and inflate that. Should be a decrease in EJ and Westford. Others should be pretty stable. Dental, in your consent agenda, the recommendation is to keep the rates level again. And you have information that was included with that consent agenda item. I think we're on firm standing to be able to keep that level, and we'll budget it based on looking at employees, and that should be a stable requirement for FY16. I already talked about property and liability. Travel and conference, you know, we've been trying to keep that level or decrease it a little bit each year. We're going to continue to do that. Supplies and equipment, I mentioned those in the same breath because the threshold of what is considered an equipment item has gone up. It's $1,000 now. So if you're buying a certain thing that's $995, we may have called that an equipment item last year. It's going to be considered a supply this year. So supplies, we're going to try to keep it level, but if there's an increase, I'm going to try to make sure that that increase is commensurate with whatever decrease we see in equipment. Technology supplies, it's another kind of change in nomenclature. We used to call it hardware, and it was a 700 line item. Now it's technology supplies as hardware. It's a 600 line item. But you're still going to see technology supplies, parentheses, hardware. You're still going to see a detailed listing of what those requirements are. And it's too early to know where that's going right now.
Is that some standardization thing, why the categorization is changing?
It's statewide. It's actually federal handbook that the state is trying to catch up to.
Got it.
The threshold, I think, is going to end up ultimately being $5,000, and it's just a standard thing that everybody's grappling with. Utilities, you can see what I have in here for natural gas and electricity, and apologies to Westford. This is really for EJ, U46, and the SU. Westford doesn't have natural gas. The bottom line is, I think between natural gas and electricity, we're still going to be pretty level. I am going to be bumping up natural gas because I've just been hearing things about transportation costs because of the pipeline, things like that. But even when I do that, if I assume a 6% annual increase and a 3% annual increase for electricity, it looks like we're going to be pretty level. Westford, I'll be talking about the assumptions we make for wood chips and those kinds of things whenever we have your detailed conversation. Child nutrition subsidy, I just talked about that a little bit. 14 deficit was lower than 13, but we talked about the fact that we think there's going to be annual deficits of well over 100,000. We've just built ourselves into a hole of about 226, so that's why I would want to influx a little bit extra like we tried to do with TAP money, but there wasn't quite that much money to throw in there. So that's like all the different individual line items. My proposed guidance is just to kind of follow these assumptions up here and to try to keep the SU assessment either level or a 1% increase. So meaning what you're going to see as the typical SU assessment would be pretty level or a 1% increase locally in your individual districts. I can't say much about what the special ed SU assessment is going to be because we haven't gone through the service plans yet. So that remains to be seen. But those are costs that you would have seen in your local districts anyway. And that's it as far as the FY16 budget discussion. In case questions come up, I did do a little chart. I know that people have been talking about REDS, regional educational districts, unifications from supervisory unions into supervisory districts. I know there's a lot of questions that have come up out there. I don't know what I can do to help you with those kind of questions, but what I did do was something I could do. I looked at FY15 budgets and tax rates. If you can just take one and pass it along. I looked at FY15 and I looked at what Westford's budget was and all the way down to what an equalized tax rate would be, homestead tax rate. I did the same thing for U46, meaning EJ and Essex Town pieces. And then I did the same thing for Essex Junction K8 and Essex Town K8, because we have to look at this by community, not by district. So just to give you a quick snapshot, if you ever kind of want to know, so what would this mean? If you look at that final equalized homestead tax rate near the bottom of that chart, Westford ended up at $1.51. And this was eye-opening to me too, because I really didn't ever look at the equalized tax rate and what each district looked like compared to each other. EJ, you have to look at the 912 and then the EJ pre-K8, the 53.9 and the 98.9 add together, and you see the blended EJ tax rate that you should see on tax bills is $1.53. So $1.51 Westford, $1.53 EJ. You look at the two green numbers and add those together. In Essex Town, it's $1.52. So $1.51, $1.52, $1.53 for our communities. Very close. I was surprised at how close that was. So what I did was I averaged, the far right column is the average of the districts. Adding up all the budgets, the non-property tax revenue, doing all the calculations, the equalized homestead tax rate would be $1.52, not surprising. Then what I did was I looked at the fact that you've heard about, Linda Wade Simpson came in and talked to us about what are the incentives. The incentives are you would save 8 cents on your tax rate in the first year. So if you did that, then if we were one district, our tax rate would be $1.44. Now you can compare that to what your tax rate was in each of your districts, or each of your communities. To put that into context, the footnote number 1 shows you that if, like, Westford was $1.51, so what would it have taken Westford to get to $1.44? They would have had to cut their budget by $210,000. Essex Junction, 1.3 million. Essex Town, 1.4 million. So I'm not saying, I'm not trying to advocate one way or another. I was wanting to do some homework to see what it looked like as far as these incentives go. And I thought it might be good for you to kind of see this. There are some other notes in here if there's other questions that this leads to, and you can let me know. But it was more of just a what if for me to look at how it would have played out.
Yeah.
We had legislators, Martha, talk to us about just trying to understand and model what it could look like. So by using last year's rates, we would never say that this would be the savings, because those rates are going to be different for your upcoming budgets. But it gives you at least some opportunity to look at it and say, is it worthwhile to consider the conversation in that we could capture tax relief. It's 8 cents the first year, and then it drops to 6, and then 4, and then 2.
And we did, there was some confusion because the law sunsets in July 1st, 2017, I believe.
Yes.
So there was some confusion about, okay, so what if July 1st, 2017 is the first year? What, do you get 8? Do you get 2? Do you get nothing? What I've been told by the Agency of Education is you have to get your foot in the door before the July 1st.
Starts at 8.
And you start at 8, 6, 4, 2. The intent was the sunset is for you to get started with it, and that you would receive those benefits throughout. So the sunset of July 1st, 2017 basically means that if you don't have a supervisory district by July 1st of 2017, unless they extend it, you would not be able to get any of this. The only other thing is footnote number 4 talks about other potential transition and incentive grants. There is one specific one that if you do go to merge or change into a supervisory district, there's a $150,000 transition grant is the dollar amount. It's a one-time thing for transition costs. And there would be a lot of those. I mean,
there's one additional cost or note that is missing from this list, and it has to do with Dr. Michael DeWeese's meeting during the 2004 timeframe, and that the unification startup costs in 2004 were estimated at $1 million. Now that's 2004. you bring that forward to today, you're probably in the $2 to $3 million for startup costs. Now, no specifics were given, but that was his best judgment at that time to our U46 board. So that's an important point too, that it's a wash.
That's a good.
Well, it might be a wash in the first year,
Right.
if it really was that. But,
Yes.
I mean, and you've got unification to talk about later, and I
There are-
really wasn't trying to,
Yeah.
jump in here and stick my nose in it, but, I mean, there's different ways you could do transition too. I mean,
Right.
you could do transition as the savings occur, like, oh, whenever you fire me and just go to one business manager, well, that may be the year that you push everybody into one one financial system and pay for the price with the savings. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot to talk about there, but I wasn't sure how this would look across our communities until I
But
did
It's
this.
a good exercise, but
Yeah.
there's always two sides to this. And that second side never gets really discussed or put in writing, but it was reality. And there needs to be a plan for the startup and the costs for the startup and the saving. If people are going to approve this, they need to know that there are real savings in the unification process. If they're not, then we need to say that right up front. And I think that's being transparent with the taxpayers of our communities.
And I would say, just my opinion is there's got to be savings there. But more importantly, I think it's got to be better for kids.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I just wanted to give that to you in case you get question about what would this look like, what would it mean. I just wanted to give you some data that you could hold on to, put in your back pocket or
Keep
whatever.
it fresh, knowing we got a deadline coming up, that their legislature has put together some incentives, and we were encouraged to look at those and to do some modeling as far as
Well,
what it might mean.
As superintendent, would you be willing to determine what those startup costs would be and lay out a plan of what the
I think that
estimate?
would be the work of a study committee,
Oh, okay.
as.
Dust off the old one, update it.
There was some modeling done, in the last study. Things have changed dramatically. You've cut a
Yeah.
10
major
years later.
position out of the organization. So there's,
there was no-
cost savings throughout, because we've continued to see which ways we could be more effective and efficient. Your copier lease, the things that we've been doing all along have been consolidating services. So Act 153 with special ed services, anything that we've been able to capture, we have. So we didn't stop in 2004 and say, okay, it's not going to happen. What we've been doing, and many of you around the table have been with us through this process,
Yeah.
is we've been unifying internally a lot of our services, and we have a shared service model here in the SU board. So we're in a closer place than places where there's like 7 or 8 different communities. Basically, you have 3 separate municipalities in this. So it's something worth your time to go back and look, and when we get to that agenda topic, we can give you
Okay.
pointers as far as what to look at that you've seen in the past, so that you know that past history and help to make an informed decision moving forward.
So I didn't mean to distract from the conversation. So is everybody okay with the FY16 budget discussion? Any questions on that?
Could you give a quick pie chart, Grant, of what the assessment is on U46 versus Westford versus PC of the CCSU budget?
I absolutely could. I just can't do it off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
no, I would be very curious to know that.
What I remember is Westford is typically in the 7 or 8%
Right,
range,
right.
and I was thinking it was like 54% for U46.
55.
Oh, really? I thought
Yeah.
I thought it was, anyway, rather than speculate, I'd be curious to know.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I can give you the percentages. Which when I give it to you, then when I say U46, of course, I mean what you split with what Essex High School
Yes,
and
yes,
CCSU
yep.
and Rec and EJ.
Yeah.
So I can give you percentages from last year.
Okay.
Um,
And I'm going to assume that they're going to be roughly about the same going into FY.
Yeah, it should be roughly. You
60.
shouldn't see major swings,
Right,
but
right.
there are factors that change,
Yes.
like percentage of computers.
Right.
That's one of the factors we use, and that
Right.
has changed.
Right.
But square footage hasn't changed, percentage of staff shouldn't change dramatically. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I can do that, and then I can send it out to everybody. And I assume you're gonna tell me to go home now?
I am,
If
unless.
you are gonna tell me to go home, I was gonna say, there are a couple of consent agenda items that if you have questions on, maybe I should stick
If you had
around.
any questions
The
on the
dental and the
dental or the
copier.
copier.
And the
please.
copier is just
You've seen
an
that at the
agreement for
local
SU to
level.
pay EJ.
Right.
We love
Go
the
home,
consent.
Okay.
Mr. Grant.
Yeah,
Thank you
we'll
so much
say-
for
Thank you.
Yes,
shaping it
thanks,
so
Grant.
well for everyone to understand.
So I do have one thing that it's not for Grant, so thank you, Grant. On the FY16, right? So how do we do it? I got 2, maybe 3 items that are key communication the board should be doing with our legislators. Dual enrollment, okay, that's for the high school. So does U46 do it, or does it SU board do it? Excess spending thresholds, what the heck are they doing to us? This is, no, we don't like this. Okay, crafting something, how do we proceed as a SU board, or as the SU, talking about, I'm gonna take this, U46, okay, what do we do? What's the plan?
So if you're thinking about, I heard your audience being the legislators.
That's the
That
main
was-
thing I was
that's your
thinking
main
of,
thing?
yeah.
In the past, and I'll open up that conversation, in the past, we've done legislative desserts. Essex Town's hosted one year, we've
Right.
hosted the next. You've had face-to-face time with the local legislators. If you found that to be helpful, if that's a venue you'd like to proceed, we can, surely it's on our annual work plan, to have this conversation, and we would pursue it as an SU board, but then of course invite all local board members, which we've done in the past. Be curious to know your feedback on that venue, to have FaceTime, or if you have other suggestions.
One thing I've found in the past when we've done this legislative, we usually do it in the spring, and it's too late by the spring to give feedback to the legislators, because they go home or whatever. And I think when we've done it in the past, this is my personal opinion, I feel that Grant, the financial CEOs of companies, are better equipped to discuss it, like if we did a legislative dinner or a meeting or lunch, and I would love to do it, but I also think financial, like Town of Essex, financial guru, and Grant would be beneficial to have there, because we've done it with superintendents before, but I think it's gotta be very, very down to earth, because the money situation is becoming tougher and tougher, and I can't explain the base rate or everything like Grant can. So,
So I heard earlier, and invite, CFO.
So before Grant leaves, do we need to give you a thumbs up or thumbs down on your proposed budget guidance?
Yeah, every year I have like proposed guidance included in these, and it's never an action item, it's more just head nods. If somebody takes offense to it, then we have to talk about it, but if everybody seems comfortable, then you have your opportunity to make changes as we do budgets. So I didn't see anybody, violently react to that, so that's kind of what I'll try to aim for.
Fine. It's good.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks,
See you
Grant.
next month.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you, Grant.
thanks.
So yeah, November, December, before the session. Right?
That's,
That's when we should do it. Session starts in January.
but I think part of that conversation, beside what you've got down there, is Grant, like he's saying, schools and districts are trying to come up with budgets now. You're having to plan for it now. And there's so many question marks on things. It's making their jobs very difficult. It's making board jobs difficult. And,
And it's hard because I think our community's struggle because that number changes on us too. So it's hard to have public confidence when there's different changes that come down the pike as far as the rates that get set along the way and then they get changed. Yeah, it's a concern.
Yeah. I don't know if I necessarily would, I think earlier is better, but there may be a case that we wouldn't necessarily kind of couch this in a dollars and cents, how it affects the budget kind of thing, but more of the process. For example, and I know this is kind of U46 centric, but as we talk about dual enrollment and funding, is this going to be an agency of education or is this a district thing? That's the kind of conversation I think we could involve with the legislators about, not just saying, you know, is it 2.6 million transferred or whatever. What are those? What are those? You know, say 3 or 4 key things that our representatives in Montpelier need to champion forward for us. You know, and have that early before the
But
session
I
starts.
think you gotta have concrete examples. I mean, to me, sitting during budget time, if you don't give me the impact in dollars and cents, it doesn't hit me as hard. Like, for instance, you know, an example is I tried to explain to a spouse at home why I wouldn't even consider cutting the budget because 1 cent, what it equates to was why start cutting kids' programs. You know, I mean, I don't know, there's so much put on school districts and school boards as being the blame for the rates being high and everything. And I just think we've got to get on top of it and get in there and start coming up with solutions and
But I think this is
advocating.
exactly the thing is, you know, so then you have to kind of think about it, you know, whatever it is, financial details, philosophical, so that means we have to plan now into, when's our next meeting? 2 months from now, right? This board, right, is that what communication would need to come from this board? What we actually need is help from Grant ahead of time, before the thing. Say, what are our key messages? What's his key message? What does he not know about? What's the key? What does he want the board, as the reps of the public, from a school board perspective, to be driving into the legislative reps of the public
Right.
to tell them,
tell them.
what their constituents care about, you know, relative to schools. That's what, you know.
Oh, I think he
we're to-
outlined it for you pretty
Yeah,
well.
I think
I
you did.
think
I
so,
think you
yeah.
did. I think you did.
Yeah.
You know, I
So-
think your
so-
talking points are right here.
Right, so then it's like, okay, so then that means, okay, that's where I'm kind of getting at, is, okay, so who's doing it? What are we doing? Is it a sub-team? Is it the board? Are we gonna decide at our next meeting? You know, how do we go about the every year talking to the legislators, you know, more as opposed to, or maybe we all are okay with, well, we're just gonna have a breakfast and just gonna say whatever. That's what I'm kind of saying.
Right.
So
He's raising his hand.
having seen legislative desserts here in the past,
Sure.
they're public meetings. Having invited legislators to Westford to specifically address our town's concerns around issues last fall,
Okay.
having that be totally focused on our school and what we were experiencing through the budgeting process, I can tell you that public meetings are sometimes good pressure releases, but they resulted in little, if any, visible action based on the interchanges. We, as a town, included an open letter to legislators voicing our concerns around the fact that we needed to send a message around sustainability, but some people were uncomfortable by doing that through a no vote on our budget. So instead, we like to list our names and that we had great concerns around long-term sustainability. I sent that to every single member of the House and Senate, and I heard back from 0 people. Right? These were the same people who months earlier were in attendance, said they wanted to keep open communication, but, you know, what was a public engagement and what was really a lesson to take back to Montpelier. I think that's the differentiator. We need to use what we do have in front of us for legislative action, and that is the VSBA, and utilize that for a lot of these greater conversations around what are we asking the state to do versus what are we asking local boards to do. We can still do these face-to-face things, but
Right.
don't be confused. They're public relations engagements predominantly, or venues for people to openly discuss, oftentimes frustrations. But I don't think that they're taken as official communication to your legislator of what you wish to happen. This is just personal experience.
But wouldn't we want to make it be that? Wouldn't the
think-
board say, this is our official communication to you from the board, this is what the board says?
What I'm
To
saying
you,
though
our
is
legislature.
that we need to use some of the more entrenched venues, and that would be the School Boards Association, who does take our concerns and then pushes them through to the
Right.
State House.
Team effort.
Right. It can't, if we're one board of 300 saying something, or, 3 boards of 300 in the state saying something, that's a small push. Getting other boards behind us through the VSBA is a large push from the inside, which is, I think, has to happen hand in hand.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think it can be both, because the whole thing for the legislative, the dessert, our reps, they really are our reps. All those other people in Montpelier are not our reps. They're actually other people's reps,
Well,
right? So we actually do want to do both. We want to go through all the boards and lobby it, and then we've got a lobbyist, right? So that's great. But then we actually do want to somehow communicate with our reps to say, well, because we want to have that sort of dialogue, be like, well, what do you think the residents of Essex are saying? Because from the school board perspective, this is what they're saying to us. Right? What do you think? They're saying they don't like this stuff, right? That you're doing. Okay, I'm sort of exaggerating the conversation to make the point.
Really?
Right? but right, okay, now we can engage. Oh, right, well, so do you support this decreased spending thresholds? Because we don't. And we don't think our residents do either, because that's hurting us. So we want to know, do you're our rep, do you, and where do you stand on that? I'm imagining a conversation around some, key topics to really find out about that. Our rep versus also doing, totally agree, also doing high, state level.
So I think that, Wednesday night, this coming Wednesday, October 1st, is our first regional meeting
Right.
for VSBA.
Yeah.
And I think, it's a state formula that we all share. We're all in it together. There's an interdependence. And I think it'll be an opportunity for us to see where other boards in our county find themselves as well, and find out what those shared messages are. As Mark's point is, they listen to a greater number. A regional voice would be, I think, a step in the right direction, as well as the local. I do think it's two-pronged, and I think that community members at least felt like they had an opportunity, from what I heard, to speak to their reps if they chose to attend that night. So I think just providing opportunity, whether the outcome is what people want it to be, at least the legislators that evening had an opportunity to explain the funding formula,
Right.
why it is what it was or is, and I just think that you build knowledge, and so that's for you to decide if you want to move forward. It's in the work plan that we created. Leaders at Work talked about it as something that we had to make sure we were connected to our legislators one way or another, whether we do it locally or through VSBA, however you want to approach it.
I think both ways are valid, and I think Mark was there. I can't remember who else was there when we did the municipal meeting over in South Burlington that was put together, and I thought that was a great attempt, but what I heard in the afternoon when people got up and spoke is a lot of the municipal leaders, they're frustrated. So I think it's having and inviting, you know, the municipal leaderships in and having the I think the conversation has to start locally. But yes, I agree. The only way we're going to get an impact is a bigger voice. So I think it's a two-pronged approach. But I also think that there are very bright people in this community. And when I went to that meeting, what I was discouraged about, I didn't hear anybody getting up and say, okay, here's a solution. Here's a solution that we can give you. Can we work and try this as legislation? And I think that's what's missing. All these community things are great. We get the word out. But I wish we had a community leader that could step forward that was great at talking and saying, this is what's got to happen in the future, and we've come up with a solution, you know, whether it's regional boards or whatever, and we'd like to see you pursue it. Because all I heard at that meeting was people complaint after complaint after complaint. And I don't like going to meetings where all I'm hearing is complaint after complaint. I'd like to see something come out of it and be accomplished.
Well, a little further in the agenda, we're going to talk about task teams, and maybe we can kind of figure out where this is going to land.
Where it fits, right.
As far as an action step moving forward.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
But should we just take it, do we support the legislative dessert? Yes?
Task teams, later in the agenda.
Yeah, we'll just move it to when we talk about the task teams, we'll.
Oh,
It was part of the AWP,
okay.
and as a group here, we're going to later talk about task team goals and assignments this year, and that might fit under communications.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's just the appropriate
great,
spot.
okay, great.
Well, good discussion. Next up is first reading of the wellness policy, J10.
Yeah.
I know there was an email sent out that had the policy. I don't know if everybody got it. If not, I have some
Right.
copies here.
The ones that you have, I think, have some changes since it went out. The
Right.
folks have an electronic copy of it, but I think folks need to have this
So
one.
I'll send some that way.
It's posted today, so it's on the board, it's on the CCSU website under tonight's materials.
Okay.
Red line version.
Red one.
So maybe people who sit on that, who sits on policy task team sitting around this table? Brian.
It's something we discovered last night that we might want to try to work on that. There's only one member of the entire committee that sits on the SU. And there used to be more than one, but with SU composition, so we're a beer truck away from having such a valuable update that I'll be now providing.
Well, you're so good at it. Really, do we need more than you? I mean,
The beer truck part or the
Yeah, right.
update? We met on last Wednesday, to review the progression of work on the wellness policy. As you may recall, the progress at this point in time that the CCSU policy committee chose to look at a pretty tight, pretty short, truncated policy approach to this, having the majority of the descriptions and details then be in procedure. And remind me again of the group.
We have a coordinated school health team that's been together, this is our third year. And they began brainstorming this work about 3 years ago when they first started their work.
So they've been integral in both reviewing the work of the committee and the progression of the policy, as has been the educational leadership team. And then both of those groups have also been primary authors and contributors to the procedure part of it. When we met on Wednesday, we did see that we needed to update specifically Roman numeral 2, physical education and physical activity. That needed to be updated for the policy to go through first reading with the group. what we've talked about is because this policy has a number of issues that go far into our culture and into our schools, that we've talked about making sure that the board gets a chance to see the procedure. Though the board doesn't approve procedure, those are furthered and approved by administration. That work is continuing. The committee had a good, vibrant dialogue about a couple of the areas that will now go back into the sort of educational leadership team and the other people that are working on it. That's the background and context. And again, with our policy work, I think we could always ramp up the activity that we have now going to the local board, in which it goes to every single local board in a review process in between two readings of the CCSU. It could be something that you could highlight as an agenda topic and not necessarily take it on as just a consent agenda or as a late hour agenda topic. It could be given a little bit more sunshine to discuss with your local boards and constituents.
And just a couple things to note if you're somebody who looks back at the old one. I think the coordinated school health team, the leadership team, and the policy committee all agreed that there was procedure language in the old one that really should stay in procedure. And so, as Brian mentioned, this one's a much more sort of global one. The coordinated school health team had made a recommendation to organize the sections around the 8 components of the CDC, Center for Disease Control, which has been something that a number of districts around the state have been looking at, and the board policy committee agreed. So that's why you find those 8 sections put together there. And then the team then went back after the policy committee created this first draft. The coordinated school health team then went back and started drafting out potential procedure language, which moved over to Judy and Paul for their look, to educational leadership team for about a half-a-day discussion this summer, and then back to the policy committee. So as Brian mentioned, that document's still in draft, going back and forth, but we're getting closer and closer.
I think what's also valuable to know is that 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe even 6 now, the original wellness policy came out. It was significantly focused towards child nutrition, the original wellness policy. Federal law has changed, guidelines and requirements have changed to very much more of a comprehensive wellness view. So even what is included in the policy and how the policy is structured is fairly articulated for us, though we did have some ways of how we wanted to organize, and particularly going down to the CCSU route, where we try not to duplicate what is already required of us, because we're already going to do what we're supposed to do by law or regulation, and also by that bifurcation of policy and procedure. Other districts kind of marry them together so that there's high-level policy verbiage, and then there could be right down to, and the last 12 minutes of the day shall be by policy. And we've just felt that that hasn't been the way we should do it.
On nutrition services, is the dietary guidelines for Americans what Grant was talking about?
Yes.
That's the thing.
Yes.
So no to you. Without
If
breaking
you-
our own policies.
if you
We
accept
have
the
to follow them because
policy.
it's our policy to follow them.
If you approve the policy.
Until we
approve
change the policy.
Right.
We can
Same.
always waive policy,
Right.
Oh, but Tim, I think you bring up a good point. This particular
Yeah,
work,
right.
from my observation, was it touched upon so many other laws
Yeah.
that the team was really cognizant to not repeat the laws wherever possible, because we knew we had to point to them and those laws might change.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's saying we're gonna follow the guidelines. Well, if they change the guidelines, we're still following them. We just have to keep following them.
until we decide not to follow
Right.
it.
But
Cross that bridge when we
with
come
all
to
the
it.
things that
Right.
have to do, like changing our policy.
Right.
And the
Right.
explanation of the change in
Right.
red was that the education quality standards had specific language that this team chose to put in the first draft of the policy. And then we noticed in the April version of the ed quality standards, they changed the language, so we went back in and updated it here to repeat exactly what's stated in the education quality standards.
Okay. So first reading, is there, I apologize, I don't know all the procedures that go in with this.
So it's an action item,
Mhm.
and that, you're looking for first reading approval.
Okay. So, I just need a motion to approve the wellness policy J10 at first reading.
So moved.
I'll second.
Al, and second by Brian. Any further discussion, questions, comments, concerns? No?
Yeah, yes.
Oh,
Just
yes.
one- Just one, in Article 2 there, the physical education, is it really necessary to have that parentheses as approved in April 2014
Yeah.
clause? Are we just gonna
'Cause-
follow the standards set forth in Vermont State Board of Education's from educational quality standards for physical education?
Yeah, what if they change them?
Yeah.
I think it was
Yeah,
pop-
I think we were, I think what we were cognizant there is that they had changed from December to April.
Right.
And so we were trying to put like a timestamp on it.
Right.
But there is a sense that we are gonna follow the educational, the Vermont educational quality standards, so
Yeah, I mean, so, I
Strike
don't
it
know
on
what
the
the right
they just keep changing.
protocol is, but I would recommend we just strike through that that as
Yep.
approved in April 2014 clause.
Mark, you had something?
You've enumerated all of the standards and guidelines that you're following in the second paragraph with dates.
Mhm.
So it's
Redundant.
redundant.
Right, in that case
But
it
if
is.
Jack's comment is dates aren't necessary, does that mean
Might not even be necessary there.
you strike them there as well?
'Cause otherwise, you're gonna be
Let the policy
updating and
committee figure
changing
it out
this
after,
policy.
right.
Yeah. But I think the policy committee by our schedule will have a chance to take the input from the board review as well as this review, and we'll come back with those improvements made.
Right.
This is something Paul can advise
Yep.
easily on. It's not a decision
Well-
we need to make here.
I think right after this, I would like one more policy discussion, so after we take the vote, I still would like
Okay.
a moment.
All right, so now, do I need to strike that as a motion?
As
Yeah.
amended.
No, they're just gonna
As
take back all the suggestions to make adjustments
First
in the policy
reading.
committee.
It's first reading, you're approving it at first reading, you'll give your recommendations.
Okay.
And then the policy committee will review it after each board
Bring
will
back for
also see it this month.
Oh,
Can
So-
we please just go back? Who made the motion and who seconded?
L,
Second.
Okay,
made the
thank you.
motion and Brian second.
Yep. Good.
All right, then, discussion is done. And all those in favor of approving the, policy wellness code
First reading.
J10 at first reading? Say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? None? 8-0.
And Brian's taking changes back.
So why does it have to go to each board? Question?
Because first reading, the SU board sees it, and then it goes to each local board for them to see what's been written and to give input into any revision or recommendation. Policy committee then takes all of that information, and was this perhaps the moment you were looking for? Would take that information and make any revisions, and then it would come back for second reading.
Great, because we could check in with our board, but I'm okay if it doesn't come to our board. We got 3 of us here. That's what we're doing here, man.
You are not speaking
doesn't
for all
come-
board
No,
members. I
but
can definitively
two-
say that.
Yeah.
2 of our board members are on policy that aren't here.
Right. right,
So
like,
if
we got
it
the whole
is
thing covered.
just
But it
listed
doesn't
as
come
an
back,
update.
going
it-
back to your agenda brings it back to your community.
Community,
Right.
Otherwise,
input
it's,
from the community.
it's still, in theory, this board is representational of your community.
Right, yeah.
But if there was a,
kinda-
if there was a particular thing, say, as a policy, we have kindergarten
Special
entrance
policy. Right.
age.
Right.
I may say I'm all done, but you may say, I'd really like to have this as an agenda topic
No,
at
no,
my
right,
local
yeah,
board.
yeah. So you just provide it all the time. And
So
then,
we
okay.
give the-
It's the
Give the
process
chance.
we
Yeah.
always use.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Got it.
So, Brian, you had something further to
Yeah,
add, though.
I think it was the last SU meeting I talked about that technology of how we organize our policies and how we present them to the public and also how they're able to be used by us internally is really inadequate right now. I seen there was a good amount of agreement that, we should do something about that. Well, we've stayed there, not certain what kind of authority. So we're gonna bring in someone from IT into the next policy committee meeting to try to quantify what are we talking about? Is it something that we can change in the current website or not? But when we start talking about these dates, there's a tremendous amount of policies that are cross-referenced. As we update one, we become more out of alignment with others. It's very difficult for us to see, and I can tell you as a past administrator in the district, when policy goes wrong, there's more people that devote more time to knowing our policies than we have even the capacity to do so in-house.
Right.
So you kind of go up against the other side of people that have digested and combed and found all the misalignments with your policies that sometimes are the first time we find out about them. So it's really a big investment, and we just had a budget conversation, and we talked about an going forward budget. If we just keep doing everything we're doing, these are the points
Thank you, Amy.
that Grant SAR is going to increase, but we didn't talk about any innovation. The SU is just going to look like the SU next year is how we talked about the budget.
This is like,
But this is one of those places, just like a few years ago, we talked about the climate survey. What are we going to do different to make our organization better? And I think this is something we're going to have to commit to at the budget level. I hope that when the proposal comes forward that you guys will see the value to it as well.
yeah, I totally support that.
Thank you.
Yeah, does a policy committee, okay, sorry. Does a policy committee talk about, I just had the thought of okay, so how do we make sure we're doing it?
Yes.
Is it a way to, okay, you do, okay, good.
There's some that have that requirement, but our policies are up in the couple of hundreds at this point in time.
No, right, I know, that's
So
part of it.
we're a few years behind even reviewing some of them, much less knowing whether we're measuring to them.
Right.
Gotcha. All right. Next on the agenda is task team updates. And we want to look at, somewhat the effectiveness of the current task teams and the structure of those. And Mark?
So at the last SU board meeting, we discussed the annual work plan for our superintendent. So that chart, those items were the essential work of the superintendent for this upcoming year. Those will be the things that the superintendent will be measured on and evaluated on. Now, it's important to recognize that many of those items have a component for the board as well, and that is our responsibilities as task team members to execute in support of those goals. So one small example we covered earlier was within communications, reaching out to legislators and bringing them here. What the intention was when the topic was introduced at the previous SU meeting was to go back to all of our board members and ask, what goals do you see in the AWP that align to the goals you would like out of either our standing task teams or task teams that need to be created to support one of those listed goals. So you may have gotten some feedback from your board members, board chairs. I got one piece of feedback from Scott, who can speak for himself, but that's kind of the stage we set here.
Right.
Based on Judy's AWP goals and our standing task teams, what do we want to outline as our deliverable as a task team this year?
I got a response back from Tim. You sent some
I think
information.
I said something.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I wanted to bring it up, but I can't get to my email.
Yeah.
I know a couple of things that you had mentioned were specific to the evaluation as far as how the categories, in other words, be action verbs, I think, like deploying versus deployment.
Right.
So possibly looking at some terminology there.
It was kind of a structural thing, like, yeah, what was
Right.
it supposed to be saying? And it should just be consistent all the way through.
And there were a couple other points that you made, and that was the only one I could remember off the top of my head, though, unfortunately.
I'm sorry, could you repeat, just summarize that in a sentence?
It was, some of the annual work plan was like actions, like deploying something, right? But then, as you went down, then there was like deployment. It didn't say, what, or, there was like another word that didn't say like what was to be done. It was like, it was not like an action, right? So it just mixed its, it just mixed its,
So
if
this
we could
is-
pull it up, I could just tell you like.
I know,
This
that's
is for
probably
leaders
good.
at work, just more careful language around goal
is
setting
is what
in
was
the
so-
AWP?
is what I was
Yeah, I
talking
mean, it was
about.
actually the actual
was
language
easy
in the
to
AWP.
say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just to be.
There's the annual.
It was almost more of a question, like, is it supposed to be all a certain way? Well, then we
That's
should
what he-
kind of
but that's
align
the
it to
question.
be all the certain way.
You have other, like, there's learning.
Okay.
As a.
Yeah, so, let me
Not
see.
on the annual work plan, but on the.
I think leaders at work, we haven't met since
We got
the summer,
standard one, standard two, and then there's the five
Spring.
categories.
spring, and then the three board chairs were to get together, and you guys were working the the evaluation, and then the AWP, we still had to work on and set some dates and
Yeah, as far as the leaders
goals
at
and
work.
who's responsible for them, right?
Mhm.
So if Tim's got feedback, it could come back through the leader, the leaders
Well, yeah,
at
I'm on
work.
that one, so I would be able to bring that
Yeah.
with me.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, it could go, create personal learning plans. Okay? That's very, create. They are going to be created. But then the next one is MTSS. It just says it.
Support
What-
the development.
Yeah, is it install? Is it develop? Is it roll out? Is it what's supposed to have happened at the end of how would I evaluate at the end of the year MTSS?
What's the benchmark?
What was supposed to have happened about it exists?
So that
Maybe there's
I've captured your statement. I think that Marla's comment just prior is what you're looking for. There's the one pager of topics, and then there's the goals that are set behind them.
okay. Yeah,
Right,
maybe
the
that's where it
topics.
is.
The topics are kind of our everyday reminder of what we're working on, and then the goal setting behind it are the specific deliverables that are going to be measured and evaluated.
Okay.
And we gotta move on that soon because we're gonna be working on the superintendent's evaluation again.
Right.
I think we're off our timeline again.
We are.
So Scott, what was your?
I don't remember.
I have it somewhere.
About the task teams?
Task teams, yes.
Was just, I think, getting more out of the communications.
Oh, embedding communications within other task teams.
And within all task teams. I've served on communications and there was some really good work there. But getting it out, and communications is everything. The race model. I think if it's embedded in the other I don't know how you accomplish that because that's an intense level of work and training.
Right. So what's happened is, I think that task team and membership has changed.
Yeah.
But it was an opportunity to educate board members on the RACE model, which was our strategic plan for communications. And we learned the benefits of using different techniques in that model. But I think your point is well taken. Now that we've had that learning, how do you structure task teams so that communications is maybe not its own task team anymore? Maybe it's something that's embedded into everyone's task team as a part of your charge, is that whatever policy gets developed, there's a plan of communication about that policy. Whatever legislative work we're going to do is a part of, the communications takes a piece. So communications, I think, has really narrowed over the years to budget communications, which is a pretty big topic. And people on the team have really spent a lot of time framing those conversations because it's been such a sensitive issue in the communities. The task teams were set up as a way for board members across the SU to come together to do the work. Because you don't do the work at these meetings, you do the work at the task team, and then these meetings are opportunities to point out,
Right.
you know, and to share that, the outcome. But what's happened is, I think we've been absent the charges as far as who does the work and where does the work belong. And maybe we don't have the right task teams anymore. I think Brian's point about the policy, it's a major focus of board work, that policy development and reviews is one of your primary responsibilities as board members, that and hiring and evaluating your superintendent. So those are two areas that I think this board needs to talk about as far as continuing in the structure of that. But when you look at the annual work plan, you see policy as, you know, adopt policies and procedures for wellness. That's what you saw tonight. So that keeps a focus for us. The J policies and safety policies are up, you know, for review this year. So there's a focus, but it doesn't have like, when are the meetings going to be? What's it going to look like as far as when you go through that? And quite honestly, I think that board members need to be there needs to be a chair that is a board member that's helping to schedule those meetings. It shouldn't be an administrative task. We should be there. We should man it. But you lead it. We provide you the expertise, but quite honestly, we haven't even been able to schedule those meetings. It's been hard just to schedule board meetings. And maybe we have too much. That's a question. Or maybe we need to structure ourselves differently. I don't know.
So one example that that we have from not too long ago was the task team that was formed specifically around the climate survey. And I was a part of that task team and felt it was extremely productive, primarily because we had a self-imposed deadline, an aggressive schedule for accomplishing tasks that had been identified by the committee at the start of the project. And then we held ourselves to those milestones. So we knew it would be intense, but by X date we would come with a recommendation. The recommendation would or would not be accepted based on the merits of our work. So there was impetus to work towards that goal, and there was knowledge that rather than just getting together and trying to figure out what we wanted to discuss, we did know exactly what we were doing. And I always felt that that type of structure would most likely be helpful in other task teams. We implemented it somewhat in communications when we investigated and implemented the race model, where we had an end date and we worked back and we determined how many meetings we needed to have and what we needed to have done there. I know these things all don't work like that, but meeting without a specific goal in mind is counterproductive.
The one thing I've noticed is the quieter time period is usually July, the month of July. And I think because I know with leaders at work, if we haven't met, it helps me if we say, okay, the second Tuesday of every month is leaders at work meeting. Or, and if I know what other nights other meetings are on, then I can plan on whether I could go to an open house at the schools in September. Because I find there's a lot of dates that we're having to attend other things. So if the off months, if that's when we could set up the work that we're gonna do on the task teams, or at least when we're gonna meet and set those goals of the task team. Because I don't even think we've met this year to talk about, except we've got to set those timelines and those
Correct.
goals.
We have not.
Yeah, but that's
So-
what we're kind of doing here, is defining what are they actually going to be.
Right.
So I mean, let's do the easy one. Policy. Pretty much need to have policy. Like, don't need it. Do we need to change anything? Like,
Yeah, it's not currently board run. It still relies too heavily upon staff doing it. We have no
Okay.
chair. We have no.
okay, but that's like a character. But we still need a policy sub-team.
Correct.
Before I get to I was just kind of starting with that one. We need to have one. There needs to be board representation from all the boards, and then okay, there's mechanics inside it that need to be improved. But at least that's one. Do we agree we need to have?
Policy, the J policies is the stated goal. So yes.
Right, and then there's the stated goals, clearly, of the policy team. There, okay, it's pretty well defined. We need to have one. We've got reps from all the boards.
Right.
So like,
Yes.
awesome.
Do you meet on
One, done.
certain nights of what month, of what?
Yeah, third Wednesday.
Third Wednesday, policy, third Wednesday of every month.
And then to leave it up to the committee themselves to decide on who is
Chair.
running the meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, because we can't decide from outside.
Or adopt a structure
Or-
across all committees where we,
Go.
so there are new rules that we have not had to comply with before. And that is any subgroup doing work of or for the boards now must produce minutes. They must warn their meetings. They must. So it starts looking a lot like these board meetings. So you will need a clerk. And in Westford we have found with a committee that we currently have ongoing now to have an assigned and willing chair for the committee is extremely helpful.
Okay.
So the ownership is there, and the reporting out is there. You're in compliance, and again a deadline.
I think I would throw it to kind of bang around trying to adopt what this structure is that the chair, vice chair, and clerk need to be representational of the three boards, and that it rotate around.
Right.
Because I think we certainly, we struggle sometimes with attendance, and it has to be there's two members from each thing, is just as a way of having some consistency.
And is that a norm? That's a question I had. Is that a norm you want to continue as far as a board task team only meets if there's two board members from each local board present?
We've stepped down, but every board needs to be represented.
So that's it.
That's the way we've been working. And that for policy, I would say for policy, that's very well serving.
Yes.
Because we write one policy for 3 districts, and just much more efficient to have that perspective in the policy creation than getting it.
So at least one board member for each meeting.
Across all teams?
That is a change, right?
That's
Yeah,
change.
again, I'm not sure if I could promote the value of that for I'm just saying for policy,
Yes.
it's
What
very
we're
helpful.
doing, it's what you're doing.
We started doing that on Leaders at Work before a year ago, when we had a set night. You were on there, Scott, right? Leaders at Work?
Yeah.
And we had a set night, and if Scott and I was there and a third person from Union 46, we just decided, because we couldn't get all 6 people together consistently, we said we were just gonna keep moving, because we had the
I think
evaluation.
we have to. I mean,
Yeah.
it's getting very evident that trying to get everybody that's on a committee on a particular night, every single time you want to meet
Yeah, right.
is
Might not do it.
not happening,
Has to
so.
be. So,
Okay.
so sort of like the climate committee, there was a specific charge set to determine a tool
Well, yeah,
and a process.
there's a difference between
Task.
standing committees,
Yes.
policy,
Yep.
negotiations, leaders at work,
Task.
communications. Those are standing committees. And then there's, per policy B10, advisory committees, which are have a special charge the climate committee was this, there was a charter that was put in place that said, you know, this committee is formed. It wasn't just board members, recall. We had faculty, we had staff, I think we had community members that was put in place, and it is, as Mark alluded to, it was there, it had a timeline, it had a scheduled deliverable coming out of it, okay? So what I hear the conversation going is that I know of 4 standing task teams that we have: negotiations, policy, communications, leaders at work. Do we keep those 4 standing committees going? Jack Bailendorf, person of one, says there's no need to do negotiations standing committee this year.
Right.
I mean, that's.
It comes back when we need it.
It comes back
Correct.
the year before we need it,
Right.
okay? But we're in year 1 of a 2-year contract. I don't think we need to have negotiations task team this year. I don't know, okay, do we need, I heard absolutely clearly that, you know, do we need to have policy this year?
Yep.
You know, and I also heard a conversation, well, maybe we don't need communications because those should be embedded in other, you know, throughout the other ones, so, it's not my meeting to run, Tim, I'm just,
It's all right. Anybody up here will point at you.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that, I guess that could be helpful for me coming back in, right, is, and I always had issue with this before when I was on U46, too, was policy and negotiations. I love it because it's really clear. The board's job is there's board jobs. Job, do policy. Job, do negotiations. Job, leaders at work. Wait, what? No. What's our job? Like, I would love to see these other 2. It could be the same jobs. The jobs could be in there, but I would love to see it like really be tied to, you know, what's the board's work,
right.
and that thing, those high categories of board work, like that.
Board
that
work or task team work. Not.
These task teams are just a way of doing board work in an SU
Right.
with 3 boards.
Right.
Right. So we've chosen to unify some of our work because we unify our policies. So it's
Right.
it's still board work. It's
Right.
just done in this unified way. So we call it standing committees, right, of reps from each board, right? So there you go. It's exactly. We only want to do the work on SU standing committees that are the unified work. There's other work that has to be done on individual boards,
Right.
which could have their own subcommittees, because Mark has one doing XYZ, because we need one to do this for Parks and Rec,
Right.
and you need one to talk about dual enrollment at the high school level. Okay, yeah. So we want to get it down to,
Right.
you know,
Right.
those things that are the unified board work that we're deciding together to do together, right? And so, like, I don't know leaders at work specifically, but, you know, can we go inside there and say, what are the thing that is the unified work, and then that's what we call it, and then we ask if we need it this year, and then you know, and then we say, okay, that's the committee
Right.
to do that work, and maybe that means
So- yeah.
we make smaller ones, but we add a couple. I don't know. I don't know where this is going, but you know,
And in the case of leaders at work, because it's a nebulous title, what does it mean?
what does it mean?
Right? I mean, and this
It's easier if
this happened during your leave of absence, right? Leaders at work, for example, chose 2 major missions. Mission 1 was new board member orientation, and the second one was superintendent evaluation.
Okay.
Those were 2 things that were originally done at Leaders at Work. Now, the new board member board member orientation kind of morphed from Leaders at Work into communications. But the superintendent evaluation process, which is
It's there.
which you perfectly described, Tim, it's cross, it's an SU thing, it's
Right.
not any individual district one,
Right.
resides with Leaders at Work.
Right.
Right. Scott, you had something, actually?
I was just gonna say, leaders at work, superintendent evaluation,
Key thing.
it gets no more clear than the evaluation timeline, superintendent evaluation timeline, and that's a standing committee, and that's where they work from, they maintain that timeline.
Okay. Mark?
work towards maintaining the time.
Right.
So if we can recenter this conversation around first identifying goals for, if there are goals for the 4 standing task teams, what they are, and then are there any additional goals that may not fit into one task team nicely, then we can kind of talk about the next side of this. So far I have policy, review the J policies, and third Thursday of Wednesday of every month. The second standing task team is leaders at work, right? And the work of that task team is superintendent evaluation,
All elements of superintendent evaluation.
right?
Timeline.
Right. So
Should,
those.
do that.
Jack made mention of negotiations. Even though this is a non-negotiation year, I feel like we do deserve maybe 1 or 2 opportunities to get together to start laying the groundwork for any what-if scenarios for next year. One of the pieces of feedback that came from this particular negotiation cycle is some of the bigger ideas can't get fleshed out in real time. Right, so a bigger idea is, when do we switch from V-High to the exchange? The bigger idea is, do we want to look at PD, and if that's still appropriate with the needs of today? Some of these bigger ideas that might need a little more work from our financial team to put numbers to determine whether or not they're feasible to take to the bargaining table. And that you have to do outside of the hot work of negotiations. I'd like to see that, but that's a 1 to 2 meeting commitment. I don't see that as a standing committee.
Is that something that board does, or is that something we charge administration to do?
We could get together and charge administration to do it and tell us about
I
it.
think,
We have to give guidance.
yeah, I don't think you need a standing committee to be working on some of the things that came out in negotiations. I think it's clear what administration needs to do there. I don't think we need a standing committee.
I don't think it's a standing committee, but I think that the group needs to get together to relay what work we might want to see as an option in the future. Otherwise, is there a venue for that?
Unless we use that as an agenda
This.
topic for the SU board.
Right.
I would rather use this board for that, especially because I got reassigned off the committee. We don't have any reps anymore because we reassigned ourselves.
So it's however we want to manage that. That's what this conversation is about. Okay, so that's negotiations. I'll mark that down. And the final is communications of our standing committees.
Right.
I think communications for all the boards, I think it is budget. I think it's critical that communications gravitate around the budget and getting the word out, and that takes some work, and there could be, I'm not on that committee, I'm assuming there's work that's done throughout the year of things you want communicated of all 3 districts to be consistent. The same communication coming from CCSU. And so I would assume you want to keep that one going and make the priority there, the budget cycle.
But is that more local board, or that when we were doing budgeting talks in communications the last few years, it really was, EJ, here's your flyer, Westford,
Drafted.
here's your flyer. Is that better managed locally?
In my, through my lens, the work of communications was most poignant when we produced, identified, and dialed down on the race model. We had some opportunities to educate the other boards, and I think that's the model that needs to be implemented, so we have that consistency using the race model across all of our boards. There's the consistency. It's up to the boards now to use that tool. I don't know what more the communications board can do, if I'm a member of the communications board, for me to communicate another board's budget, I'm not the expert on that. It might be one of those things like similar to negotiations, Mark, where if there's a need, the communications testing reassembles. But their work was the race model. We spent a lot of time on it.
So do we use that model? The things on the annual work plan under communications right now is there was talk about expanding that to create a public relations plan to encourage more engagement with your public. So when we were doing the annual work plan for leaders at work, that's one of the things that people talked about as far as what they wanted under communication. I'm not sure if that was well vetted. The other thing was the legislative dessert. It's our year to host, and it would be that task team that would organize it and communicate it. We'd do the invites on behalf of the SU board. But, you know, what was on the annual work plan was discussed at Leaders at Work. Now, is that the best way to approach that? The other thing was VSA and VSBA trainings, so that you're using your organization to further promote the needs of this community, the educational needs and voice.
Okay, so it looks like the two standing committees that remain are policy and leaders at work with clearly stated goals. Negotiations could dissolve for the year and perhaps use an SU meeting to provide some directives for administration to investigate for the upcoming negotiations. And communications, depending on what priorities are, may have two very specific topics to look at, or could be incorporated around other committees. So we may have just cut all of our work in half, or doubled it.
Is that,
Yeah.
I mean, just being
still-
on communications, trying to have scheduled a meeting, is the board saying they want the communications committee to handle making the legislative dessert happen? Are we being assigned that task?
That's part of, I think,
Just
what we're
agree with it.
discussing.
No, but did we agree with that? I mean, Judy read it. Like, I'm just sort of asking point blank, is that, because I'm ready to do it if everybody says that's what we should do. And then, then that way, no one else has to sign up to do it.
There's no
Right, I mean-
chair. There's no chair for the communications committee, so.
Well, but we're
that
reorganizing, so
since
we'll have to we'll have to create our own
Chair.
We
stuff
currently
at our
don't.
next meeting.
We don't have a chair. And the second point is Judy is basically coordinating the communications committee.
I'm sorry, Al.
Judy is the lead person on the communications committee, pulling together the agenda and topics. So, Judy, what do you want to do?
So I would like the communications committee
That is not right.
to meet, which I haven't been able to, we've sent out 4 different opportunities for meeting and haven't had any success with it. To identify a chair and a clerk. I
Ma-
like Brian's suggestion. You've made that
I've
suggestion.
made that suggestion
Yes.
too.
And
Good ideas come back, Al.
You're
good
right.
ideas, go around
Sounds like
and
you
come
volunteered.
back.
You made the
And to
suggestion
take
before.
on
suggestion.
whatever public relations planning around the upcoming budget session and legislative dessert. And then I think board visioning, which is another piece within the work plan.
Can I throw something out?
Sure.
You know, I think that there was a moment of clarity in taking a look of like what is the board's work, supervision, evaluation of the superintendent and policy.
Yeah.
and, you know, forming and organizing ourselves that way. And then there's board needs, and there's a communications capacity that we need. And I'm wondering, just kind of throwing it out, whether we've reached some point where meeting this need isn't necessarily being highly effective by just having the board members. I mean, whether we have, I mean, Cindy used to do quite a bit of lifting. Wasn't organizationally planned, but she did quite a bit of lifting because of her own interests and skills and talents.
Right.
Are we at some point where, I mean, like the budget story, if every board was given maybe not the numbers and how to talk about the numbers, but given how to talk about the laws and the confusion of equalized per pupil, this rate, that rate, I mean, that would be a great service just in that communications capacity. You know, we are in budget season. I just wonder, sort of like what we found with legal services, what we found with Webmaster, what we found with others, is the organization and new needs have come up, and maybe communications capacity is one of them. Because we're kind of reading off a list of like, okay, we know what policy does, we know what Leaders at Work does, then we have all these other needs, not necessarily roles, but needs, and we're like communications, that works for them. Doesn't,
So
seems like a catch-all.
a lot of that work's been done in communications, like Scott said and Al said. We've created a glossary for budget terms to help board members communicate it. Ben is the new Cindy. He created all the flyers. He helped with the messaging for Front Porch Forum. We've investigated what are the best venues to do some of the communication work. I do think we have a great strategic plan for communication. The question I think you raise is a good one, and that is, whose voice is it? Do you want it to be the administration's voice, or do you want it to be the board's voice?
I thought it would have been a better fit to have board representation, to bring someone that could take the issues from the different boards and bring them forward in the communications committee forum. It just seemed to me to make a lot of sense, because the issues at the board level may not be the ones at the superintendent level or the administration level. And you want to provide a little bit more focus in meeting the board's needs. But it's not to the exclusion of the administration, it's
Right.
to complement it.
Well, and I think that's for us to kind of talk about when we can have a meeting, you know, I mean, that's sort of on my list of things is, yeah, we have to break it down. I mean, there's communications that we're trying to do from our individual board level. We can bring that up and you know, but all boards might not want to do those same things. But okay, here's a proposal where this is what we're doing. Does it if that works for other people, then they can take it back to their board. But there's going to be a set of communications that just comes from each board. Okay, then we have to figure out, well, is there what does the SU board want to communicate? We got to decide that actually right now at this meeting, and then who's supposed to do the communicating, and what are we supposed to do, and then, or is it, no, there's just big communications that the SU board wants to do, and we would like to do it through this task team. Well, then that needs to be made clear, right? You know, so yeah, there's probably you know, it's not, we're not gonna have the answer tonight, but like, we could at least maybe put a framework around that at when we do meet at the communications committee meeting and say, okay, well, here's little things, because we can handle it with our board. We know these are the things we want to communicate just from our board, individual boards.
Right.
You know, and then, okay, we don't know what to say, because we don't know what to say for the SU board.
Well, I think
Right.
that tonight's conversation was really about legislative mandates, and this is a board that has an appreciation for the K-12 system of legislative mandates that you're all going to be grappling with and communicating that to your public this year,
Right.
and its impact on budget.
And that would be another one, this board could say, we want the communications committee task team to work on that, whatever that is. You know, we want them to come up with you know, what's the joint, you know, kind of legislative engagement that we want to do, you know, from the board.
I mean, it almost sounds, again, I'm grasping a little bit to just try to look past the way we've always organized, and obviously the way that we've been good at justifying that organization over all these years. It sort of seems like that committee, we're talking about a committee that's sort of a member board services committee. Like, this is a group of people that will help get their heads around all the K-8 educational quality standards and other things, and try to figure out either the race model. It will train it will train the other board members. It will help define things. It will give talking points. It's like a member services kind of committee.
Well, it helps educate.
But then they have to go do it.
There's an educational process there, too.
Where the other two
Yeah,
committees
still need that, right.
are instilled obligations of this board,
Right.
sort of in place of the other board's needs. We take that on. This is a committee that is really, doesn't focus too much on SU communications.
Right.
Like, we don't put a brochure out for just the SU budget. We don't have talking points for the SU. This is really about serving the member boards. It's just, for me,
Right.
that's sort of helping a little bit, sort of seeing why sometimes it gets a little squishier,
Fuzzy.
because those needs can change. You know, we have a policy
Yeah.
manual that goes up to S, you know, so we just go back to A when we're done, and it just keeps going. There's always an annual evaluation. The communications, this member services, can change.
Brian, to a little bit, I disagree with you. I think communications, what I see is that to me, the CCSU board needs to make an impact however we can towards this funding issue. So I think yearly, there's always legislative desserts. Yearly, there's the regional meetings that are being held at the Milton. I think if a communications committee got together and did the SU work, it would be that type of communications with how are you going to communicate what is beneficial for all three boards. One voice coming from CCSU to talk to the legislatures, to be up on the things coming up in Montpelier, to make sure there's a voice or somebody elected on that regional board. I mean, do we have members? You know, I think we've got to get involved on some of the broader state things to initiate change.
Does it work towards you, if I understand, sort of like a legislative liaison committee or a legislative committee? Again, I'm just purposely trying not to use communications right now to
Right.
try to tease out some kind of core recurring need that it serves.
Yeah, because that's in work of boards.
Yeah,
What you did, that's
Yeah.
now getting closer aligned to,
because I was just looking at the
Work of
VSBA
boards.
and the essential
Right.
roles, and
yeah.
So right now, our primary method of accessing the type of tasks that you're talking about is from an individual point of view and from an administrative point of view. Like, we can have these conversations. I will call Steve Dale and talk to him, right? I will talk to Judy, who then gets together and has conversations. We can go to meetings where we all discuss it. But as a board and as an SU, we really do not have a collective voice that registers a particular opinion or difficulty based on what we have to do. And if that's, I think that's what I'm hearing from you as saying, if we do recognize that there are 8 items which will present challenges for this board in the next year or 2 years, to enumerate them, to advertise them, to have people understand them, and within our community then take that message to the larger community, we could be accomplishing something that maybe other boards can benefit from as well. Maybe our organization can be effective in that means. So that is a component we have been missing, and it's been very piecemeal.
Yep.
I don't view it as a deficit because that's just how our system's set up, but we could improve on it.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
So, and I'm not sure I like the term legislative, because then I think it just narrows it in. Communications may be too broad a term. Is public relations a better term, because you're going out and you're promoting the problems? I mean,
It's
right
not just
now-
the legislators.
Huh?
It's everyone has to understand it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Engagement needs to be
besides-
public.
I mean, because, you know, people coming up to me now and saying, what are you doing to me? I'm moving out of Essex Junction. I can't afford to be here. Well, it would be nice if we had some words out there that was expressed from this board as to exactly what's happening with state education and things like this.
And to be able to paint some possibilities. Like, that was what Grant's message was tonight, that I asked him to show you some modeling of, here is some legislation that could be used. You need to communicate that those opportunities are there. You know, it's not just painting the gloom and doom of certain circumstances.
Well, actually, we had a very specific follow-up, very specific plan about that, so we should come back to that and get a feedback on it, so.
Right, because I just.
There was like action to talk to the town board.
Right, so there's this
Before
whole
we-
component, I'm still focused on this annual work plan, since I get evaluated on it, where there's that conversation about, do we wanna have this discussion about creating a red or a pre-K-12 district, or, I mean, that's what your local legislators book time into your meetings to talk to you about this year. Are you gonna take any action on their recommendation to you? And if so, what does that look like? And is it a task team, or is it a committee?
Well, I think those are all good questions, and I may be, I think just like all of us, kind of wearing a little bit. I seem to have my hook in this. What is the work of our board, and what are then the committees? You know, I think of forming the original task teams, and those task teams were here, but at the time, we had just gone through a communications audit, and there was a landscape wide of things that we needed to do, and so it was a huge task. That task is, a lot of it has kind of moved on. So it seems natural that we might be, you know, this is one committee that has accomplished so much in its time, it needs to find that next grounding. And I think this is interesting, where we're all, I mean, there's a lot that happens in Montpelier that influences our local communities at the budget level and in the school quality level. So there might be something where this isn't going away in a year or in 2 years, and if we make it some of our core work and it's recurring, it might have a lot to it. So kind of moving from a communications, which has been for the last few years really focused on that budget piece, and now moving more to an engagement level that could even talk, I mean, I think in our appreciative inquiry work, engagement is something hopefully we're evolving to, and hold different types of engagement, like summits and conversations. So it's interesting to think of that there could be a group of people that will have a core competency and help as a member services from the SU level.
Community Engagement Committee?
When we talk about the AWP and all of that, and engaging legislators, and that kind of falls under standard 2 of the superintendent's evaluation tool, and the title for that is communication and collaboration. And it seems like this is collaborating with the community. It seems like this is collaborating with legislators. It's not speaking at now, it's engagement. It's collaborating. Targeted, specific, measurable collaboration.
Yep.
And that, if we use that word, then I think, you know, the language ties right back to the AWP and supporting that.
And MTSS, it's a major component within multi-tiered systems of support, so it'd be nice to see how the board models collaboration Because that's what we're asking the organization to do.
Yep.
That's a great connection.
Right, so I like the legislative something or other. I don't know what the ultimate thing, because it is focused, because that is more along the lines of what Mark was saying. And basically, there's no way that the former communications committee could do all that stuff that we just talked about. I got 4 committees out of that: visioning, legislative, unification. But again, I think that's TBD. I think this board just talks about it more until we decide if we want to go there. But it's a potential one, and maybe then public engagement. Right? Because there's no way. I mean, I would not leave this room trying to get signed up for realistically doing all that stuff. I mean, I'm interested in the legislative thing but that's like a lot of research. That's like, okay, how do you do that? We've never done this before. You know, what are all the components of it? We're gonna have to like map it out. We're gonna spend time talking about it. We're gonna, okay, you know, yeah, that's gonna take like a whole year, basically, of just doing that. Again, how many meetings? Once a month? 10 meetings, 8 meetings? That's the level that we're talking about, you know, typical level of one of these, you know, committees, once a month meetings to really talk about. So that would be a pretty good goal, you know, kind of, if you kind of think ahead, is if it got defined as legislative engagement committee, something, I don't know exactly, you know, then okay, I could see we get together, we talk about what that means, what do we think it means, our little committee, and then we work through that through a whole year and come out with something at the end where, to get a process that, okay, we think this is the process that we would do. That these are the kinds of things we should do, and then roll it every year. This is how we do this, right? That is like potentially bite-offable,
Yep.
right? But like not with all those other things that also got thrown out,
I
right?
think public engagement includes your legislative, it includes your local, it includes regional. So I can see a committee working strictly on that. And
Right.
then if we're talking studying the union thing, then that's where we'd have an in-date committee that works on something.
Right.
I'm trying to wrap this up, this discussion. I'm trying to come up with a way of what do we do with all this that we just talked about now?
So the central themes that have come up are that we preserve policy and leaders at work as is. Negotiations
In some-
incorporates
Yep.
some way.
Right.
And the rest of this sounds as if perhaps what we would like to do is convene the standing communications committee to take this data in and see if they can come up with their next iteration, the next phase of what they will morph into, and come back to this board with that suggestion for, you know, essentially approval of their next charge, whatever that may be. So let that work
Okay.
based on this conversation, percolate, and come back with an answer, because I don't think we're gonna arrive at it during
No.
this meeting.
No.
Being a member of the communications committee, I can see us, you know, being able to deliver that.
Who else is on communications committee? Are you?
Tim,
Oh, you got
I mean,
4 here.
It's many of the same in this room, so I believe we can capture what has happened here, formulate a plan to come back to the SU board with for approval.
okay.
Is that acceptable?
I think it's a really good charge to start with.
We
That's
meet
your
next
initial
month
charge.
as a board, or is it the
Don't
month
know.
after?
We meet
TBD.
next month.
TBD.
Next month we meet as a CCSU board?
Yeah, I don't know what the date is, but
I think the other thing I heard is because of these committees, we need to make sure the committees are among themselves electing a chair, however you go about
Right.
it, and you have a clerk. So
October
whenever you
26th.
get together, you guys, like leaders at work or your committee, have got to start figuring out who the chair is so that the meetings can be called
Yeah,
together.
right, then the chair runs the organizing, calling the meeting, saying, this is the meeting. And
schedules the
and-
meeting and gets.
And that's the thing, like, you know, I treat these as like, you have to do this. Like, you know, like, yeah, it has to take some amount of priority, right? Like, I mean, that's my goal going into these. If I'm gonna be on one of these committees, like, okay, I'm gonna, yeah. Like,
So
okay,
October 27th is the next SU board meeting.
That's what I thought.
A month away. So, does it seem reasonable for members of this board to ensure that each standing committee that you just identified, policies are all set, because they have, but leaders at work and communication will be convened
Yeah.
before the
Yeah.
next
Yeah,
board
we gotta
meeting.
do it.
I think that's what we,
With a charge.
that's what we charge out.
As chair
Yep.
and
I
a
don't-
clerk.
Yeah.
I don't see how we don't.
right.
Otherwise, we're
Yeah,
out
we
of
gotta do it.
compliance on
Okay.
Yeah, we gotta do it.
Right.
minutes and such.
Right.
All right, I believe I've
So-
captured that.
Can you
Okay.
pull that back up? Coming way back to the superintendent evaluation, the very beginning thing you said, I found it, if Scott can pull it back up. Was, at the bottom of, these are in the sub-pages where you see standard 2, and then it was really a kind of a question, and maybe this is just my misunderstanding, it wasn't clear. Maturity level assessment of the superintendent, I saw those as a progression. The least mature is over here on the left, and the most mature is over on the right.
Correct.
And those are the ones that that's why it was unclear, because I thought they should all be ings,
Right.
because it should be reacting, approaching, deploying, learning, integrating. Because it was like some of them were learning and then it was integration. And so it was unclear, like, because it's like a thing about what it means, what it's meant to be meaning is, this is what the superintendent is doing. They're reacting, at this level.
This is a tool that leaders at work a year on, based on the Ohio model. So I'm gonna look to you, Al, because you were.
Yep, it's a standards-based model, and the description that you gave is approximately correct, and it reflects the maturity level, in that case, of the, from the very inexperienced superintendent that is reacting to the very well-educated, well-heeled superintendent that has integrated all of the staff, the resources, all of the skills, internal and external, to meet a specific need. So you have this continuum of expertise, and then the board evaluates the superintendent on a whole as to where they fit in this continuum. The score is
Right.
agreed upon.
And I think Tim was really
Okay.
just looking to see, that
That's
they're
basically
more
what I needed.
active voice kind
Yeah.
of terms versus.
Yeah, I mean, you guys decide if you want to do that. I
This-
mostly just needed to understand, because it was confusing at first. I didn't understand that that's what it was, and I'm like, I think what it's trying to say is it's a
We have
continuum.
to put finishing touches on that annual work plan, so that's good feedback.
So that's just the feedback. And then, so if I've got 6 elements of standard 2, is that like scored for every element then?
No.
No, we establish in the annual work plan which elements are.
The more questions you ask, the
Understandable.
more likely it is you're gonna end up at leaders at work.
Right, you need to
Well,
be
that's
on
the
that
other,
No,
committee.
that's the
because-
quick answer. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. You needs to be on that committee.
I'm okay, I'm on communications, so. Okay,
No,
I can-
you need to be on
but-
2 committees.
but,
Yeah.
We can talk about that one.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I'm okay with it. I just need to know how it works.
These were the ones that were.
Well, I think it's an important
Yeah.
point in that,
Yeah.
you're an SU board member who, what's the responsibility of leaders at work to ensure that all
Yeah.
their board members understand the tool that's
Right.
being used and the process?
Yeah, and that's why I'm asking, because I see that as that's how we're dividing up our board work. The sub-boards relinquish their board role, their board job to evaluate the superintendent to this board. And that's this board's job. It's apparently doing it primarily through leaders at work.
So we're setting
That's like my view of like the
Setting-
way it works.
Setting
Just-
the understanding of the criteria, of the model, helping to educate. This model is a quantum, light years jump compared to where we were, to where we
Yeah,
are
it's
now.
great.
So it is just a model to help with a more effective evaluation process.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, totally agree.
But the final decision is made right here.
Right.
Right. So then I guess my next question, just a mechanical question.
Right.
We changed the executive session. I thought I was gonna find out more there, but maybe not, or maybe I am gonna find out something, and so we'll just talk about it then. But like, so how does it work?
Yeah, I guess we'll get to that in,
I,
when we get to that
I
item.
When do I
honest-
get to see it?
I honestly
the committee.
think the materials of Leaders at Work and the timeline, if it can be sent to Tim, Scott, you've got all that, can you send that to
And we
Tim?
all have it.
We all,
Right, we all have it.
We all have it.
It's on the
Yeah,
CCSU
right.
site.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've got that.
He's seen the model.
Yeah, right.
He's asking
I'm just
how.
now down to like the actual, like, yeah, okay, this month, yeah, I thought I was gonna see something.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
And we're gonna get to that.
that's number.
Okay, yeah, we're not there yet.
Okay, so, the next, agenda item was just, basically, putting out the, Unified Union information.
Right, and just so you know, on your site, I've had Ben scan in lots of the information from the last Unified Union Study Committee. So you can see what the articles were, what the agenda was, trying to see if I can get an electronic version of all the minutes from Allison Weinhagen, who was the clerk of that committee at the time, so we can get those posted. But I think there's been really good questions about, you know, why did it pass committee but fail in the community? Just lots of questions about it. And it's kind of good to take a glimpse back to see what communication was around it and the study was about.
What they didn't provide.
Yeah, so that you know
Lot.
what to ask moving forward if you're interested in moving forward with the conversation. It's solely there for your information as research.
Okay.
Okay.
Check that out. Consent agenda.
Wait, hang on.
Oh.
So the follow-up, if I remember, I might read the minutes, but I thought the follow-up was some chair was gonna talk to Essex Town, because we said, when we talked about unification, we said, well, wait a minute, whoa, like, before we go off making plans and all kinds of stuff, we better just do some basic finding out if the other unified people we're unifying with would be interested or entertaining it.
Right,
So I don't know if
the
that
work
happened or
plan
not.
says Unified District Exploration, VSBA, and Essex Town Collaboration. So back to that question of, you know, where is that work gonna happen? And probably at this stage of the game, we haven't defined it yet.
But I'm talking about something very specific from our last meeting, which I thought, now maybe I misunderstood. I thought that was actually gonna happen between the spring and now.
The communication with Essex Town.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm looking at the chairs.
It didn't
'Cause I
happen.
thought you did.
Didn't
Okay,
happen.
okay. So is that,
But I don't recall that as being an action item from the last meeting either.
Oh,
So
okay.
maybe you're remembering something that I don't.
right, do we,
But that was I had the same either correct or incorrect memory that it was charged that the executive committee was gonna talk with Essex.
Right.
yeah. I mean, we don't need to, it doesn't matter, it didn't happen yet, so,
Vaguely
so
remember
is
that.
that, maybe that's just something we could just say, is that something that we think should happen?
So I think where we're at right now
Go further.
is the availability of the previous Unified Union study to all board members is a necessary condition prior to moving forward on anything else. We need to understand what the parameters were, how they were researched, what may have changed since then, what may have stayed the same. With that background knowledge, can we then walk into a conversation where we start understanding if there is some synergy? So, has there been any formal meeting? No, there has not.
Okay, because that's how you're
Is
looking at
this
it.
first important foundational step in place? Yes. And to me, it's imperative that we frame this and that we have to understand our own history first. Right? This is still an open wound for some people in the community, but it's equally difficult for taxpayers today. So the balance
sure.
is there.
Right.
We will move forward.
Got a question because of the time and how late we're running. Is this conversation of the board work in October on the agenda? Would we have a conversation of what we've all read on the site so we have a general understanding?
So that's a next agenda item. Understanding, research and report out of,
Right.
okay.
Research and report out of, I'm not following.
And
you.
report,
Of the review and history of
Of
the
the-
Unified Union
But
materials.
is,
Everybody review it offline to the whatever you need to
Yeah.
review or
Right.
your jog your memory, and then come back and we talk about it.
Right.
and make a decision how to move forward. Is that
Right.
what we're saying?
That's what Marla was suggesting, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
okay. Got
I
it.
will say to this board that the Essex Town School District has reached out to U46 to talk about how we can better engage. And that's, I'm not saying that's anything to do with Unified Union, but it may be because half of U46 is Essex Town School District.
Sure, right.
At least, right?
Yeah.
So there's a natural segue there, and the Essex Town School District does want to come into a dialogue with at least U46, if not the CCSU board, and ways to collaborate. And I already, and Superintendent DeNova and Superintendent Andrew are probably talk to each other several times a month, if not weekly, okay? So I don't think that there's a black, the Great Wall of China exists between the Essex Town and CCSU here. Because some of these dialogues are, although not formally codified by any charter with any specific task, are kind of ongoing already.
Yeah, and there's always a whole level of collaboration that's already happening. But this is something totally different. Unification is like totally unification, like way beyond collaboration. And so like, I guess that's just what I was thinking is like, if they already know, you know what, all we really want to do is collaborate. We don't want to unify. There's no support for it in our board, and there's no support, we don't think there's any support in our community. I don't even want to look at this, I don't even want to waste my time.
Right.
It seems like it's a phone call. Like, if they think, if they say, you know what? Yeah, we think it's possible now. We think, on our board, we think it's possible, and in our community, we're not sure, but we think it's possible. Okay, I'm ready to go at the drop of a hat. But why waste our time?
Yeah, this is where, I mean, we were there, and the minutes clearly show we were there. We had this conversation. There was a charge.
Right.
There's bandwidth. I understand it. It didn't get done, but I just can't live a deja vu. So
Yeah.
it didn't get done. That's fine. I don't want to reorganize things from a consensus that we had in May. We said we were going to build out the website and approach Essex Town, just for that answer. That's where we are.
Okay.
There's a compelling reason why we should change our mind from something we decided on consensus
Right.
in May, that we can bring that up, but not to reorganize because something didn't happen.
Right.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I still think
I'd
that
agree.
a quick volley over to say, what's your appetite on this? I think is a great way to go. I've enjoyed having the material that Ben's posted up there to walk down memory lane. There are a lot of things, as Al said, that aren't on there.
That are significant.
Yeah, that are
Yeah, right.
significant. So, but that work before we put any more elbow grease into it.
Right.
Let's just see where it is.
Yeah, that can happen over email if somebody does it, and then, whatever's the best way. If you want to do it because you already have some
No
kind of
point
engagement,
putting
great,
2 years
whatever
worth of
works the
work into
best.
something that fails in the
Then
community.
just
It's
let us know by
absolutely a
email.
waste of
Yes,
time.
they say it's a possibility. Do what we said and come back ready to talk about it at the next meeting. Okay, I will do it.
Never mind. I think there's some significant issues, and one of them is that there is still no law, and we don't know what the law is going to be. And there are major differences at the Senate level in terms of the way that law is constructed. So,
Don't have to worry about that yet.
yeah, you don't have to
Might not have
worry
to worry about
about
it
that, but there were a number of reasons why it failed, and spending 2 years worth of work and then watching it fail is a total waste of effort. So let's get the things out on the table so everyone has a common understanding. If you want to ignore those things, then go down the 2-year path. End of story.
So is Ben gonna be posting these,
It's on the, it's
Sorry,
on
phone.
the,
They're on the board member site.
Yeah, he has a section,
on the board member
it's
side?
called, yeah.
Unified Union Information.
It is a walk down memories lane, I've forgotten all of that.
Yeah,
All right, well, let's
tore these boards apart.
get through this consent agenda.
Yep.
I move that we approve the consent agenda with the approval of warrants, the approval of meeting minutes of May 27th, 2014, that we adopt the FY16 budget calendar, approve the dental program premium rates and administrative fee, and agree to the copier printer sharing agreement.
Okay.
Se-
Is there a
second.
second?
Who will formally second that?
Second.
Al. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 8-0. All right, so any other future agenda items?
Yes, one.
Yes.
The kneecap science results came out. I know we don't speak about students very often. I did have an opportunity tonight to just touch base with Amy Cole, and she had some, I have some concerns, she has some concerns, and there's a dialogue going on in the district. The concern is well beyond U46. So it's a district-wide concern, not only at Essex High, ADL, but also EMS. So I think, I hope that this board would bring Amy back for some dialogue about what happened on the scores, what their plan is going forward. I think it's an important topic and an important discussion.
Got it?
If you, for your minutes, Mark, I have a summary chart that describes the concerns. Okay.
So I guess I,
Forward.
just
Okay.
in terms of what are the SU board's job is, it doesn't seem like that's it. Doesn't
Okay.
seem like that's, that we're all gonna end up reviewing something in our individual boards. But that seems really detailed, you know, in that, cause we need, you know, we're gonna have the detailed information. It doesn't seem like that we want, you know, we could help consolidate our work and not do that at the SU meeting, but do it at our individual meetings.
So we generally collect future agenda topic items as suggestions, and that's left to the board chairs to incorporate them in the meetings based on feedback. So that's feedback you
Okay,
can
that's
give.
feedback.
That's feedback to give the board chair,
Right.
after this.
Yeah.
Is there an upcoming carousel meeting?
I don't think we have one scheduled.
Just- That's,
Is-
that's even better, because
There-
there's all 16 of us.
This board had a conversation saying that you didn't
Proficient,
find that
75%.
carousel time to be valuable, so we abandoned that.
Fall.
Yeah, so we only have
Is that
the
off of
June.
It's off the website.
Okay, other future agenda items?
Sample
for the SU
size
board?
is
I have the one that was suggested as far as the
25% proficient.
history of the
40%
unification.
proficient, 75,
discussion on
58.
Yep.
Unification, yeah.
That's from
So
54.
I guess my suggestion would be
Those
the
are huge.
visioning, strategic
6% is
planning.
significant.
You know, that's something we don't do a lot of in
6%.
individual board meetings, maybe we do
That's-
now, I don't know.
That's out of the box.
I won't speak for other boards, but that seems like that could
They're very
be a real
concerned.
role
Amy didn't
of
know
the
what to
SU
do.
board if we carve it out.
Visioning and
We could have a
strategic
whole
planning.
discussion around that if we wanna.
Serious
Take-
So SU visioning
Yeah, at the SU level, right?
Yeah.
Because we-
and strategic planning.
because strategic planning and
gonna-
visioning
43 to
at
50.
the district level
At
is
the-
different than it is.
Exactly.
No idea what happened.
Other future agenda items?
We're gonna be given the budget.
Yeah, the
Budget?
budget presentation,
Having a hard time
that's
with
gonna
that.
be big.
We're probably gonna have the second reading of the wellness policy.
Okay.
And I'm assuming, I'm not sure how your
We'll have the evaluation.
superintendent
Evaluation will be there.
evaluation's going, but hopefully that's going to be ready. Cause our timeline is
Yes.
November is the,
Department of Ed's
is it
website.
formative or
Oh,
summative?
yeah.
I always get
Formative.
confused the
Formative
first
National
one, cause
Assessment
we're
Report.
already into the next
Mm-hmm.
So you can just
year's
fill in
evaluation.
Correct.
pending
Okay, any
challenges,
others?
Charts.
Last year's.
Okay.
Okay, so then the last thing was, we were gonna move into executive session to talk about the superintendent evaluation. It's not complete yet, it's, if you want a percentage, it's, about 90% complete. Even amongst a small group of people, just 3 of us, it's amazing how difficult it is to find time just for 3 individuals to get together. And when you divvy up the work and even just one individual has something, we're learning that it affects the overall outcome. And perhaps going forward, we look at a different model of how to do this process. I don't know what that is yet, but that's something we can talk, amongst the leaders at work. But the evaluation will be finished and ready for, you guys will see it at the next meeting. Tim?
So can you just give me what's my role? Do I just get to review it? I wasn't here last year, so I wouldn't be able to give a lot of input, but basically I'm thinking ahead for next year. So you guys do everything, fill it all out, and then we just review it, or how does it work?
Essentially, yes.
It's gonna happen at the next meeting, basically.
You will receive it.
What was gonna happen at this meeting.
It will have been done and discussed with Judy, and you will receive the outcome.
So a timeline of what's left to do is probably appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at what the Leaders at Work template is, there were multiple standards and I forget the exact. Yes, and the elements for each of the standards were identified.
Right.
That work was divided amongst the 3 board chairs. Evidence was listed to prove any of the statements that were made in the evaluation. That evidence was provided by the central office by request, or from all of the published org notes and materials from the meetings that we hold. It's important to note this is evidence-based, specifically because last year we struggled with the fact that we didn't have evidence as the central component of a lot of these. So, as Michael alluded to, approximately 90% of that work is done. Now what is left is to summarize all of those elements to an overall evaluation, distribute it to the board members, review it with our superintendent, and then at a SU board meeting, an executive session, as noted by the state of Vermont's rules and regulations, do the review that employee evaluation for the SU board.
Right.
So that's where we are in the process. We have those last few components left to do.
Scott?
So that's in the past. Looking to the future also, that just to keep us on schedule, there's the needs assessment that needs to be completed or worked on at least in September. Future agenda item, or where are we on that?
That's right.
I will note that.
Leaders at Work, who does that?
Conduct, well, that's us. Conduct a CC, September is one of the 3 elements for September 2014. One of the 3 is conduct CCSU needs assessment, and that's the CCSU board for the next fiscal year. That's
Right.
what
So-
begins driving the formation of the annual work plan.
In parallel with this evaluation, there are other activities that are ongoing throughout the before and after that evaluation. So it's a comprehensive 18-month cycle.
Yep, I got it.
Okay, good.
So just, where are we in that?
So how do we do that?
Yeah.
And
What is it?
Leaders at Work.
Yeah, a lot of that work is done in the Leaders at Work group,
Yeah.
which
Well,
we need to meet.
well, you know, it took a team effort to get
Mhm.
to that model,
to get it to
and
this
it was,
point.
that was probably one of the most significant pieces of work that I've seen done in this district. It was huge, and I appreciate everybody's leadership to contribute on that. Everybody had a little piece of it. It was, I know Jack and Mark, you guys, Mike, you, Scott, I mean, you know,
Mhm.
everybody did an excellent job.
So it's worth it to note that this is our second year of administration. The first year, a pilot year, was really training wheels.
Yeah.
We did not, I believe we did not work through some of the more significant details prior to the pilot year, and that was around evidence. Right, by soliciting feedback from every board member, it became very clear that sometimes we were remembering just the recent past rather than the entirety of the year, and collecting documentation to substantiate any of our evaluation is, well, in my opinion, it's required of us. Otherwise, how would we ever expect one of our employees to be able to reflect on our evaluation? So that added component this year, I think, has increased the quality of the work, but it's also increased the complexity a bit. I believe it'll be better for it, and the next time we do it, it will be faster, easier, and more understood.
Yes.
Right. Right.
Is there something other SU board members, I know in talking to Mike as chair of the Prudential Committee, there's a lot of work that the chairs end up having to do. Is there something at Leaders at Work we need to look at? Is there other things that our board can help out with to take some pressure off, or?
Unfortunately, the answer is kind of yes and no. But I think one thing that we can utilize, which I know I have not done thus far, and I can't speak for the other two, is we do have a vice chair. And to delegate some work to the vice chair in order to support the time needed to do something specific is perfectly permissible. And our ability to utilize that resource is there. I know I haven't done it. But then again, I'm a glutton for punishment, and I like going to meetings. So, I haven't felt the need yet, but I know I can't speak for everybody.
Right. I'm just looking at, I'll be honest, just keep swimming, keep learning on my part.
Yeah.
And the continuous improvement.
Well,
And
it's
hopefully
new.
it'll be there.
Well,
It's a learning curve.
Yeah.
we'll have this conversation here tonight on the CCSU board. Well, let's remand it to the Leaders at Work. And then inside the Leaders at Work, let's remand it to the executive committee. So what happens, so we have things like, how come you guys didn't get the work done that you said you were gonna get done in May for Unified Union? Well, executive committee, you heard what Mark said earlier, how hard it is. So there's a case where, I would say, to Mark's point, to delegate out, to have more people, you asked the question, Marlo, what
Right.
can we do? It doesn't have to always be an executive committee, or executive committee action, for example,
Right.
Yeah, that's what I think
And
that's
we're
what
all,
we're asking.
and I think a lot of us are under tremendous professional
Right.
pressure too in our own individual
Right.
jobs. And those stresses are not going away, and so it takes a lot. It takes a lot of effort to get things done.
Well, this is feedback to the scheduling, perhaps, or we can feed this back to Leaders at Work to do it better next time.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And also, to come back to Leaders at Work, we did a pilot, now you're going through it this year. Maybe we have made it too complex.
No.
No,
No?
no, it's just
No.
it's learning. It's
Some
learning.
of it's the
We're on
learning, some
we're
of
on
it's,
the right
That's
path.
good.
is there other ways of prepping things a little bit more ahead of time? I mean, those kinds
Right.
of things. And I think
It's that
we're going
tu-
to be able to do that
You're tuning it.
continuing forward.
More importantly, if I know what the AWP is and I know what the elements we are measuring are, I can go to a meeting today and realize that this presentation from our superintendent, this body of work from her subordinate satisfies that element, I can begin
Right.
that evaluation in my head today.
Yep.
Right, that is the level of familiarity that we only have now, going through it once or twice,
Right.
that we didn't have before.
Right.
That will make this easier.
That you know what you're looking for evidence.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
It is not evaluating Judy, it's evaluating the effectiveness of the organization which she manages, and Judy,
Right.
right? So it's more than just one person, and that's why you have to pay attention the whole time.
All right, so, any last minute questions, concerns, whatever?
Nope.
We're adjourned.
Okay, thank you.